Hey guys. This is part 7 of What If Naruto was in RWBY. Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start. Chapter 36. As Naruto and Pira walked off the arena after exchanging a few parting words with Jester, they were greeted by a grinning Yang and Weiss. "What are you guys doing here?" the blonde captain questioned. Weiss rolled her eyes. "Our fight is up next, you dolt." Naruto childishly stuck his tongue out at the heiress. Pira only giggled at the interaction. "Well, good luck in your fight, you two. We'll be watching from the stands." Yang cockily bumped her fists together. "No worries, we got this in the bag. Show 'em how we blondes do it, firecracker!" Naruto cheered. With nothing left to say, the two pairs parted ways, the power couple of Beacon making their way to the stands while Yang and Weiss confidently strode out to the arena. Right as Naruto and Pira found themselves at the stairwell leading into the bleachers, the latter felt her scroll vibrate. Turning to see what had made his girlfriend pause, the blonde quirked a brow upon seeing the confused look on her face. "What's up, Pira-chan?" Pira could only shrug. "It's a message from Professor Ashbin. He wants me to meet with him in his office later today." The blonde scratched at his chin. "Maybe he wants to congratulate you on our victory?" While she wasn't exactly sure her boyfriend was right, it was really the only plausible answer, seeing as she couldn't think of anything else that would warrant the headmaster wanting to talk to her specifically. Hearing Naruto's scroll go off in his pocket only confused the pair even more. Popping the little white device open to see that he had also received a message from the coffee-loving head of Beacon only gave the whiskered teen a sinking feeling in his gut. "Accompany Ms. Nikos to my office later today. We must discuss the weather today." While the meaning of the message flew completely over Pira's head, Naruto knew exactly what was being said. Why is he going to tell Pira about the maidens? Naruto's brain was working overtime as he tried to figure out what reasons their enigmatic headmaster would have for wanting to tell Pira about the maidens, something that was clearly a well-guarded secret. "He's going to make her into a maiden," Kurama answered through their shared mental link. While he was currently quite comfortable on a certain scythe wielder's lap, he had easily sensed his container's unease and heard the thoughts racing through his head. "What?" Naruto couldn't help but shout aloud. While his red-haired partner looked worried by the sudden outburst and the shocked look on his face, Kurama maintained a calm facade. "That is the only feasible answer I can think of. That man made it very clear that the maidens are specifically called that because only young women can inherit these powers. However, he never said exactly how these powers moved from host to host. I would have thought it'd either be completely random or hereditary like Hagoromojiji's sons," Naruto expressed. Kurama grunted. "I thought the same, but that doesn't seem to be the case. Neither you or I have sensed anything out of the ordinary from Pira, and something like these maidens' powers would be hard to miss. This can only mean that the headmaster has a way of transferring the powers." Raking a hand through his wild mane of golden locks, Naruto couldn't help but sigh as he looked at the concerned look on his partner's face. "What's wrong?" I might know what Ashbin wants to talk to you about." The curious look on his partner's face coaxed the blonde into continuing. "It's not something we should talk about in the open though, and I could be totally wrong, but if it's not what I think it is, I've got some big news to tell you guys." "Okay," Pira answered simply with a smile, showing just how much she trusted her significant other. For once, Naruto found himself hoping that both he and Kurama were wrong, a sentiment the Bijuu shared. "Kami, you're a bitch," Naruto cursed, as soon as he and Pira had entered their headmaster's office, a silent crow waiting by the elevator. The blonde couldn't shake the feeling of dread that hung over him. When Ashbin inevitably asked, "What's your favorite fairy tale?" Naruto had to use all of his willpower to not grab the nearest piece of furniture and chuck it out a window. When the silver-haired headmaster then declared, "And we believe you are next in line to inherit the Fall Maiden's powers," the blonde Uzumaki felt his left eye develop a tick while the only thing going through his mind was, "You've got to be fucking kidding me." Now here he was with Pira crammed into an elevator along with Ashbin, Glinda, Crow, and Ironwood headed to Kami knows where, his red-haired girlfriend shooting him confused looks and desperately clutching his hand as if it were her only lifeline. However, as the elevator passed the lowest floor and kept going, Naruto's displeasure with the situation was overshadowed as he sensed something very familiar suddenly begin to permeate the air. Nature chakra. Something or someone nearby was using senjutsu. As the elevator came to its final stop, several floors beyond what either Naruto and Pira thought was possible, the couple found themselves simultaneously awed and confused. Flickering emerald flames cast just enough light so as to illuminate the finely polished marble floors and walls, the odd coloration of the flames bathing everything in an eerie green glow. Arches decorated either wall, the many openings leading to tunnels far too dark to properly see down. The back wall of the sparsely decorated vault had an odd runic symbol seemingly etched into it, giving the underground place a semi-religious motif. As the pair followed after the confident strides of Ironwood, Ashbin, and Crow, Glinda took in the deeply confused look of the students with a hint of concern. "You must have some questions." Despite the growing strangeness of the situation, Naruto snorted. "Some questions?" "More like a couple dozen." Crow chuckled at the blonde's sense of humor, though either Ironwood or Glinda seemed to find it appropriate. Ignoring her boyfriend's sarcasm, Pira asked, "You said I was next in line to receive these powers? What did you mean by that?" Glinda sighed before explaining. "The maidens have existed for thousands of years, but much like in nature, the seasons change. No two summers are alike." Naruto narrowed his eyes at that, suddenly paying rapt attention to his fellow blonde. When a maiden dies, her power leaves her body and seeks out a new host, ensuring that the seasons are never lost, and that no individual can hold on to that power forever. The strict deputy headmistress finished. "So it's kind of like reincarnation." Naruto suddenly piped in. Ashbin glanced back at his blonde student. "Although it shares similarities with that idea, the way the maiden's powers chooses a host is entirely different." Naruto quirked a brow. Taking note of the fact that the power apparently chose its host, the whiskered teen asked the million-lean question. "And how does the power choose its host?" Crow scoffed. "Through a series of stupid and convoluted rules." Goodrich snapped her gaze to the cape-wearing huntsman, growling, "Crow." The crimson-eyed uncle remained unfazed by the stern blonde. "Hey, don't get mad 'cause I'm right." More than familiar with Crow and his mannerisms, Glinda sighed before turning to address the still confused couple. At first, the only thing that was certain was that the powers were specifically passed on to young women. But as time went on, it was discovered that the selection process was much more intimate. Both Naruto and Pira's eyes widened. Quickly glancing at her partner, the emerald-eyed teen gulped. Intimate?" Not realizing what her word choice had done to the two teens, Glinda nodded. "As we understand it now, when a maiden dies, the one who is in her final thoughts is the first candidate to inherit her power. Unless it's a dude or some old hag. Then the power goes to someone random, and our job gets a lot harder," Crow added. Finally fed up with all the dancing around the topic, Naruto stopped where he stood, causing everyone to do the same and stare at him with questioning gazes. "This is a nice history lesson and all, but why is Pira the one to inherit this maiden's powers? Why take the time to not only tell the both of us, but take us down to this secret bunker?" Turning his gaze so he stared at Ashbin directly, the blonde teen asked, "What's really going on here?" Each of the four adults took the time to look at each other, a silent conversation that neither Naruto or Pira were privy to happening in a few looks. Eventually, Ashbin stepped forward. "You two are already exceptionally capable warriors and intelligent in your own rights. Your mission record says as much. Having spent so much time outside the bounds of our kingdom's walls, I'm sure you've noticed, the creatures of Grimm are growing stronger, more prevalent. Beasts that have slumbered for decades have suddenly awoken. New types of Grimm are appearing." It was here that Ironwood finally spoke up. "Although everything seems to be business as usual on the surface, tensions are running high. As much as it saddens us, we fear that soon, the peace we've worked so hard to build and maintain will come crashing down around us." Pira gasped as she finally realized just what the two headmasters were hinting at. Shakily she asked, "You can't be talking about a war?" Atlas General and Headmaster sighed. "Not a war between nations, no." Naruto frowned. "But a war nonetheless." Growing irritated with all of the talking, Crow took a swig from his flask. "Look, we can fill you both in on all the gritty details later. But right now all you need to know is that one of the maidens was attacked and, for the first time in history, part of her power was stolen." Realizing that they had eventually arrived at the back wall of the bunker, Naruto's eyes widened as he took in the source of the nature chakra he had felt earlier. Eyes closed and garbed in a pair of stark white undergarments, a mocha-skinned girl who looked to be roughly about their age lay inside of some sort of pod. The most shocking thing, aside from her putting off waves of nature energy, was the horrid burn scar that marred the left half of her face. Beyond shocked by now, Pyrrha could only ask, "Is that?" Ashbin, his face suddenly overcome with no small amount of guilt and shame, sighed. "Yes. This is Amber, the current Fall Maiden." Looking at all the machinery crammed into the area around this girl, Naruto had to wonder, how is she alive? By using state-of-the-art Atlas technology. Ironwood confidently explained. However, his shoulders sagged as the sight before reminded him just how grave the situation was. Still, there is a lot about this situation that is unprecedented. What do you mean? If, when she dies, Pyrrha interjected unsurely, won't her powers just move on to the next host? Probably not. Naruto intoned with a frown, catching the others off guard. More than likely, the power will look for its other half. Even if that wasn't the case, on the battlefield, your thoughts are usually focused on your opponent, so. Recalling his encounter with Sora, the young monk who had housed a small portion of Kurama's chakra, and the way they reacted to each other, Naruto was willing to bet that whatever this power the maidens had would act similarly. Despite the brevity of the situation, Crow scoffed before fake whispering. Wow, look who's been paying attention, these kids really are smart. Glinda pinched the bridge of her nose in a weak attempt to fight her usual frustration with the alcoholic scythe user. Naruto cracked a grin, enjoying the caped huntsman's sense of humor. Deciding to act like she hadn't heard Crow, Pyrrha instead turned to regard her headmaster. So unless something is done, whenever Amber dies, the powers go to her assailant. Exactly, and that does not bode well for anyone. Ashbin sighed. Pyrrha turned to stare at the unmoving form of the Fall Maiden who somehow lay on the line between life and death. Part of her wondered why, despite pretty much having her whole world turned upside down and being forced to question everything and everyone she thought she knew, she felt so calm. That wasn't to say that it didn't terrify her to hear both Beacon and Atlas headmasters tell her that war was all but knocking on their doors. It didn't belittle the sadness she felt as she stared at the poor girl, who was undoubtedly only a scant year or so older than her, trapped between life and death with only one of those roads open to her. Feeling a warmth spread through her, Pyrrha turned to see Naruto placing a hand on her shoulder, a reassuring smile plastered across his face. Right. My boyfriend is a literal ninja from thousands of years ago, partners with what amounts to a literal force of nature, and is gearing up to fight his ancestor who was responsible for orchestrating the fall of his time despite being sealed away in the moon. My tolerance for all things odd has been set pretty high recently. Grasping the hand on her shoulder, Pyrrha returned the smile before turning to face the questioning gazes of Ashbin and his group. I'll do it, I'll become your Fall Maiden. The confidence in Pyrrha started to waver as she was met by a general sense of unease and wariness from the four adults. Confused by their reaction, she asked, Isn't that what you wanted? Ashbin shook his head. It is, but I'm afraid it's not that simple. Given Amber's condition, you won't be able to inherit her powers naturally. Just as confused as his partner, Naruto asked. We figured as much, but if you guys had already chosen Pyrrha to take the spot as Fall Maiden, wouldn't that mean that you already have another way to give them to her? Ironwood stepped forward. We do. You see, for the past few years, Atlas has been studying aura from a much more scientific point of view, how it works, what it's made of, and how it can be used. This intrigued even Kurama, who so far had been content to simply be a passive viewer through his connection with Naruto. The fox doubted even Kaguya had such an understanding of chakra. Then again, this was aura they were talking about, the purely young side of chakra, possibly meaning it must that much easier to study. We've made significant strides, Ironwood continued, and we believe we've found a way to capture it. Naruto had to resist the urge to groan at that. Really? Their civilization is so much more advanced than ours ever was, and they'd barely figured out what shinobi have known how to do since literally the birth of chakra? Kurama had to agree with his container. The way Ironwood had talked made it seem like he and his scientists could create an artificial life form with a soul or something. Irritated with all the beating around the bush, Naruto asked, So you can capture it? Then what? Ironwood frowned at the teen's brusque manner of speaking but nonetheless answered, We can't give you Amber's powers alone, but we can give you what they're tied to, her aura. Pyrrha whispered in realization. Ashbin nodded. Her soul would become intertwined with yours. The question is what's that gonna do to you? Crow finished, finally giving away what they had each been concerned about. Pyrrha gasped as the full weight of the situation finally landed on her shoulders. She could become far more powerful than she had ever dreamed of, making both her dream to do some immense act of good for the world and her goal to help Naruto combat whatever enemies he had, that much closer to reality. However, the cost of that power could very well be her very existence. Her identity as Pira Nikos could be washed away by embers. Before her mind could continue on that train of thought, she was brought back to reality by the feeling of Naruto's arms circling her waist. Thankful for the small bit of comfort the gesture brought her, the redhead turned to her headmaster again as Ashbin spoke again. You have an important decision before you, Miss Nikos. There's no guarantee this transfer will work, and there's no telling if you will be the same person if it does. I advise you to take time on this matter. But understand that before the vital festival is over, we will need your answer. Gazing at the suddenly imposing figures of the four adults before, Pira shakily nodded her head. Seeing the shaken form of one of his precious students, the bespectacled headmaster turned a meaningful gaze to the blonde currently holding her. The assailant that attacked the Fall Maiden has made their first move, and there's no telling when their next move will be. Naruto understood the unspoken message loud and clear. As much as Pira had a role to play in the coming events, so too did he. So did everyone. Sunset at Beacon was a sight to behold. While nighttime blanketed the campus in an ethereal and soothing aura, sunset likewise brought its own certain beauty to the school. Bathed in the setting sun's purples and reds, a certain couple found themselves quietly seated atop a roof, enjoying the final rays of the sun. How much of that did you know? Pira asked curiously. There was no accusation in her words, she was simply curious to know how much of what they had just learned was Naruto privy to. Raking a hand through his hair as he stared at the setting sun, Naruto sighed. Ashbin had only told me what the maidens were and that they were still around. Everything else is new to me. Absent-mindedly playing with a stray lock of her hair, Pira had to ask. What should I do? Naruto grinned. We take option C. Now fully focused on her boyfriend, the redhead of Team NPR stared questioningly into the grinning blonde's eyes. There's an option C? While Ironwood thinks his kingdom's discovery of containing aura and putting into something else is this great breakthrough, we shinobi have been able to do that literally since the beginning. Naruto practically ranted in excitement. Recalling the story of Kagaya and her two sons, Pira realized what the Jinchuriki was getting at. You're talking about the jutsu used to bind a biju to a human? Naruto nodded rapidly in agreement. There's tons of different fuin jutsu out there that do it. Heck, I heard that each of the villages had their own way of doing it. Suddenly growing even more giddy, the whiskered Uzumaki grabbed Pira's shoulders. You know what the best part is? It was at this moment that Kurama decided to join the conversation. The scroll we took from Konoha contains a copy of the sealing array the brat's parents used as a basis for the one that binds me to him. Naruto pouted. Spoil sport. Slowly it all clicked into place for Pira. There was a way to gain the maiden's powers without sacrificing who she was. There was a way for her to help the world as Pira Nikos. Flooded by a sense of relief and joy, the redhead did the only thing she could think to do. She kissed her boyfriend. Caught off guard by the sudden action, it took Naruto's brain a moment to catch up. Needing to breathe, the couple pulled apart, a blush prominent on both their faces. Oh sure, he gets the kiss for telling you even though I'm the one who helped him figure it out. Kurama groused. Laughing at the sight of a pouting Biju, Pira grabbed the shrunken Kyubi and pulled him in for a hug, gently kissing the top of his brow. Thank you for your help and concern, Kurama. Pira giggled. Stunned, Kurama needed a second for his brain to reboot, unable to believe what had just happened. As he recollected himself, the sentient force of chakra grunted. I didn't ask for your validation. Neither member of Team NPR could take the fox's reply seriously, considering they could easily see the deep red stain on his furry cheeks. Shaking his head, Naruto rose to his feet. Well, we should get back. I want to look into this whole sealing a maiden's powers thing, and Nora said something about helping you get ready for the one-on-one rounds. Pira's face was suddenly torn between abject terror and what may have been an attempt to smile, though it looked far more painful than a smile should have. Oh, Nora wants to help train me? How wonderful! Naruto could only sympathize with his partner. While he took his training regimen pretty seriously, Nora could sometimes take the cake. If he didn't know that the hammer wielder was actually pretty well versed in fashion, he'd be worried about her suddenly donning a tight green jumpsuit and shouting about the springtime of youth. Remembering Konoha's two taijutsu specialists, Naruto had to repress a shudder of disgust. Thank the Kami Jiraiya had put his foot down, and stopped him from ever even trying to wear one of those horrid green monstrosities. The hell was I thinking at the time? The blonde wondered. Any further pondering on his formerly bad fashion sense was halted when he felt the now familiar feeling of Pyrrha interlacing her fingers with his own. Come on. Like you said, we've got a lot of work to do. Looking at the smiling visage of his girlfriend, something he didn't think he'd ever get tired of saying, the whiskered teen decided then and there he was going to make damn sure that she continued to smile like that. Ladies and gentlemen, meet the 8 individuals who have proven their strength and skill and now stand as this year's Vital Festival finalists. Naruto grinned as he watched Pyrrha demurely wave at the cheering crowd while Yang basked in the glow of the spotlights. This was it. The final leg of the Vital Festival tournament. From here on out it would be one-on-one battles fought on a completely vacant field. The combatants had no teammates to fall back on and no terrain to use to their advantage. To win these matches, the fighters would have to rely solely on their own skill and tenacity. Part of Naruto wished that he was up there competing as well, but he knew how unfair that would be. Hell, he was pretty sure he could take all 8 of the finalists on by himself. After all, one needed a pretty specific skill set to combat a Jinchuriki, let alone one capable of tapping into their Biju's power. And the 2 fighters kicking off the one-on-one rounds are Yang Xiaolong and Mercury Black of Beacon Academy. Instantly Naruto's grin fell and a pit of dread formed in his stomach. Fists clenched so hard that his hands were near pure white, the blue-eyed Uzumaki stared across the field to the bleachers opposite him. Glacial sapphires bore into mischievously dancing ambers. The next move had been made. Chapter 37. Yang panted, a sheen of sweat covering her, as she stared down her opponent. Minutes into their match, and it seemed like she and Mercury were both equals and opposites. Both favored a more personal approach to fighting and seemingly matched each other in terms of speed, raw physical strength, and durability. However, where Yang used her fists and dual-ranged shot gauntlets endearingly named Ember Celica, Mercury fought with his lower half, both of his feet outfitted with a weapon none too dissimilar to her own. None of this information was new to her though. While Team Siameni had gone out of their way to keep their abilities hidden throughout the school year, Yang had seen his fights in both the 4-on-4 and doubles rounds. Still, finding out that he fought using a mix of several different styles, all of which centered around kicks and misdirection, had made Yang less than hyped to fight him. Despite that though, the blonde had been prepared. She knew she struggled against opponents like Mercury. That had been made clear to her back when she fought Junior's twins. While she had easily taken care of the twin who used a pair of claws, the sister who wore a pair of bladed heels had given her some trouble. This was something she strove to fix during her tenure at Beacon. Thanks to her team and Team NNPR, more specifically her fellow blonde, Yang had done just that. Mercury apparently hadn't been expecting that if the look of frustration on his face was anything to go by. She shouldn't be pushing me this far. I need to get back in control of this or the plan is going to take a serious hit, Mercury huffed. The respite the two had taken through some unspoken agreement came to an end with Yang sprinting towards her opponent, arms held close to her chest. Mercury rolled around the blonde, quickly rising with a sweeping kick aimed for her back. Pivoting, Yang tanked the harsh kick with her left and lashed out with a hook from her right. To the surprise of many, the silver-haired teen used his open hand to redirect the attempted strike before rolling out of the way of Yang's boot that she had attempted to plant into his stomach. With a quick handspring, Mercury was back on his feet, a cocky smirk on his face. Yang growled. "Wow, this is a really close match," Ruby noted with no small amount of surprise. Sure, she had caught glimpses of what Mercury could do, but she had grown up with Yang. She knew her training regimen, her style, and just what her older sister was capable of. Thusly, Ruby knew quite well that, while the blonde was a formidable force, there were still many more who could beat her. However, the captain of Team RWBY could easily count the number of people who could match Yang at her own game and win. Sure, Nora was just as physically strong as Yang, but the orange-haired girl rarely used that strength with her own 2 fists, preferring manhild. Pyrrha could no doubt outmaneuver and outplay her sister, but Ruby highly doubted the redhead would want to get into a fistfight with the busted brawler. The only 2 people Ruby knew of who were just as good at close combat as her sister were also blonde, being their father who had taught Yang in the first place and Naruto, who was just unfairly overpowered. The silver-eyed teen shivered as she recalled seeing the 2 blondes go at it. How the 2 didn't walk out of that training field with the bones in their arms turned to dust was a slight against nature. Still, watching as Mercury spun on his back to dodge an overhead kick from Yang, only to come back around with a kick of his own, was putting RWBY on the edge of her seat. Something wrong? Pyrrha asked, catching Naruto as he got out of his seat. The whiskered teen chuckled nervously. Just gotta use the restroom is all. Pyrrha blinked owlishly. Her boyfriend was a terrible liar, even more so to her, but she trusted him above all else, so instead of grilling him, the redhead simply smiled and nodded. Hurry back. As Naruto entered the nearly empty halls of the floating arena, his smile dropped and his eyes gained a cold, glacial tint to them. All too casually, the Jinchuriki walked into the shadows, vanishing from sight. It was only thanks to her years of experience that Cinder was able to nimbly avoid having a kunai lodge itself in her upper thigh. In one smooth motion, she spun around, flames engulfing her hands. Sparks flew as a familiar Chikuto-class blade clashed against her twin blades of obsidian. Arctic blue glared into shocked ambers. Call off Mercury, now! Despite her arms shaking under the amount of force the blonde was exerting, Cinder somehow managed one of her trademark smirks. Whatever do you mean? That smirk was quickly wiped off her face when a fist was plowed directly into her cheek. The lithe raven-haired woman was sent tumbling by the unexpected attack. Emerging from the cloud of smoke his clone had left behind, a Rasengan held in either hand, Naruto growled out. Enough games. I told you from the beginning that if you ever even tried to hurt one of my precious people, I would put an end to whatever plans you had. Without so much as hitching his breath, Kurama's chakra enshrouded him, the pair of Rasengan now glowing an almost sinister vermilion color. This is your final warning, Cinder. Call off whatever scheme you have involving Yang, or I will show you why we Jinchuriki were so feared. Rising to her feet, Cinder bore an almost uncharacteristic frown as she gazed at the blonde. Why? Why would you choose to side with the men who are far more concerned with their own little games? It was Naruto's turn to frown. The only side I've chosen is the one that keeps my precious people and the innocent safe, the former shinobi declared. Cinder shook her head. She was right about you. Without giving the teen any time to ponder what she had said, Cinder knocked 3 of her signature arrows. However, Naruto was not going to give her the time to use them, vanishing from sight in a blur of speed. Rolling to the side, Cinder narrowly avoided having the business end of a Rasengan introduced to her abdomen. Quickly coming up from her roll into a kneeling position, the raven-haired schemer fired her trio of arrows point blank. Cinder cursed under her breath as the arrows pierced flesh, only for their victim to go up in smoke. In one quick motion she dismantled her bow, switching it back into a pair of blades. Sparks flew once more as Hino Ishii's blade was blocked by Cinder's own 2 swords. Unlike last time though, it was the amber-eyed femme fatale who took the initiative. As flames coated Cinder's obsidian blades, forcing Naruto to disengage, the blonde's eyes widened as his senses were overwhelmed by an all-too-familiar feeling. It was you. You're the one who stole part of the Fall Maiden's powers. The raven-haired woman's response was a condescending smirk as her right eye was encircled by a ring of flames. So they told you about the maidens. I can only imagine why they would choose now of all times to reveal such information to you. Naruto's grip on his weapon tightened till his knuckles were white. Before any more banter or blows could be exchanged, Kurama chimed in, something's wrong. There was a huge spike in negativity, and it's already started attracting hordes of Grimm. It took Naruto only a fraction of a second to realize just what that meant. The ground exploded in a shower of dirt as Naruto roared over the sound of his Rasengan. What did you do to Yang? Having yet again just evaded being eviscerated by the spinning ball of chakra, Cinder held one of her blades to the angry Jinchuriki's throat. Despite having the business end of a weapon held to his jugular, Naruto continued to glare venomously at the woman. I can assure you Yang Xiaolong is fine. However, her chances of winning this tournament have all but vanished, Cinder revealed. Fearing the worst, Naruto had to make a decision. Of course, being who he was, there was hardly any doubt in his mind what his choice was. Friends came first above all else. Without even a moment's hesitation, the blonde used his bare hand to grab a hold of Cinder's blade. Caught off guard, the older woman could do nothing but allow herself to be dragged closer to the blonde. Sinister rubies attempted to bore a hole into wide ambers. You better hope Yang is unharmed. If even a hair is out of place on her head, there will be nowhere on Remnant you can hide. With barely a grunt of effort, Naruto shattered the obsidian blade in his hand, reducing it to nothing but shards. As quickly and silently as he had appeared, the blonde was gone, leaving behind a still stunned Cinder. Quickly shaking off the daze, the raven-haired seductress spared one last glance at the floating stadium. Her mistress had been right. They would need to go with their contingency plan now that Naruto was actively going against them. Leaning on the wall, silently watching on as Yang's teammates attempted to console her, Naruto mentally promised that he would help his fellow blonde give Mercury what he had coming to him. Pushing any thoughts of revenge to the background though, the blue-eyed Jinchuriki instead turned to his furry partner. Enough is enough, Kurama. I can't stand seeing Yang like this. She deserves to know, they all do. Knowing just how much his container valued his friends, the kitsune-themed Biju could only gruffly sigh. While I may disagree, at the end of the day it is your decision to make. You care more for these Ningen more than I do. If you think they can handle it, then tell them. Having known the chakra construct for his entire 17 years, Naruto knew that was as much of a go ahead as he was going to get from the grouch. Yang, seeing that he had her attention, as well as the rest of Team RWBY's, the blue-eyed teen stared directly into the lilac eyes of his fellow blonde and continued. I believe you. Yang blinked. You do? Pulling up a chair, Naruto attempted to imitate either Irika or Sakura when they went into lecture mode. Back during the shinobi era, there were 3 main branches of jutsu: ninjutsu, taijutsu, and genjutsu. Casually holding up his hand, Naruto created a Rasengan. Ninjutsu are techniques like my Rasengan or any of the other elemental attacks you've seen me use. Taijutsu is pretty much what you guys call martial arts these days. Dismissing the glowing blue sphere of chakra with ease, the blonde then focused back in on Yang with a purposeful gaze. Genjutsu was the branch of techniques that used chakra to create illusions. Some illusions were as simple and subtle as making your opponent think he was standing a little bit further back than he actually was, all the way up to making someone think they were seeing their worst nightmares come to life, driving them to insanity. Weiss arched a delicate eyebrow. Are you trying to imply that someone, possibly Mercury, used an illusion on Yang? Naruto flashed the heiress a foxy grin. Got it in one, princess. Blake shook her head. But that would mean that not only did Mercury, or some unknown person working with him, have the ability to create something so convincing, but that they also planned it. Yeah. RWBY chimed in. I mean, who would want to do that and why? It's not like Yang has someone out to get her or something, right sis? Said Teen sheepishly chuckled. I mean, aside from a few perverts who got a little too handsy, or maybe Junior and his boys, I don't think I have enemies who'd be willing to go to such lengths. Naruto sighed as he realized it was finally time to drop the truth bomb, again. You don't, at least none who are after you specifically. The only person who has the means and motivation to pull this off is Cinder. What? You mean the chick who's always trying to get you in her bed? Yang questioned. But what does she get out of it? RWBY added. And how are you so sure it's her? Blake queried. Deciding to answer the questions in order, Naruto listed off. Yes, that same Cinder, and what does she get out of it? Unease, distrust, anger, fear. She's planted a seed and made this whole tournament a giant buffet for all the negative emotions that the Grim are attracted to. As for her ultimate end goal? I'm honestly still not entirely too sure, but me and Kurama have some good guesses. Leaning back into his chair, Naruto sighed before admitting. And why am I so sure she's the one pulling the strings in all of this? She's been trying to recruit me for almost a year now. Wait, so you've known about all of this for a year, and you're barely telling any of us now? Weiss exclaimed. Before Naruto could so much as defend himself, he was sent sprawling to the floor thanks to a clobbering from Yang. What the hell? That's for keeping secrets from us again, Yang answered. Rubbing his throbbing head, Naruto sulked. I guess I deserve that. The busted brawler crossed her arms under her bust and smirked. But you know, I think there's someone else who would love to hear about all of this too. It took all of a second for the blue-eyed Uzumaki to realize what Yang was planning. Wait. No, Yang, please dash. Oh, Pirara. Soon after, Naruto was forced to remember how convincing his girlfriend could be. Recalling some of the stories he had heard about his mother, the whiskered Jinchuriki realized that the two redheads had far more in common than he first thought. Huffing in frustration, Naruto raked his hands through his mane of wild locks. It seemed like only yesterday his biggest worry was trying to acclimate to this new time period. Now, here he was working on unraveling the inner workings of the Hack no Fuin Shiki, 8 trigram sealing style, so he could hopefully use it to seal the power of a seasonal maiden into his girlfriend, all while a full-scale coup, helmed by a woman who had stolen part of the same maiden's powers, loomed just beyond the horizon. To make matters worse, the threat of his apparent ancestral grandmother, a woman who had been hailed as a literal goddess and had orchestrated her own revival and the downfall of his era despite being literally sealed in the moon, was also a looming specter. Shaking off those more serious thoughts, the blue-eyed teen was thankful that his precious people were safe at least. There had been a brief moment of panic concerning Yang, but those were washed away when he found that she was physically okay. Her mental state had been a different matter altogether though. However, with the unconditional love of her friends and family, she had been pulled out of that state rather quickly. Her private talk with Professor Ashbin had also seemed to do her some good. It was still utter crap that she had been disqualified from the tournament and vilified by the ignorant majority, but Yang wasn't someone to put much stock into what others thought of her. Still, Naruto had to wonder who was the one who had cast the illusion. He knew Neo's semblance allowed her to create something akin to illusions, but they were nowhere close to being as convincing as a genjutsu. Actually, after closely examining the petite teen's semblance, Naruto had found that Neo's semblance actually allowed her to create miracle, not illusions. The difference was that Neo's mirages were only visual projections. It was still possible to smell, sense, and hear what the pint-sized umbrella wielder was actually doing. Seeing as Yang had described hearing Mercury speak to her, as well as the feeling of his bones breaking under the force of her counterattack, Neo was out as the perpetrator. Since he and Cinder had been chatting at that time, that meant the culprit was either Mercury or Emerald. But none of that mattered right now, especially seeing as how the entirety of Team C-Many had apparently vacated Beacon entirely, which could not mean anything good. All things considered though, the group of teens had taken the revelation of not only Cinder's betrayal well, but they had also been somewhat underwhelmed when he told them that the story of the seasonal maidens had some truth to it. Most of them seemed to agree that it was hard to top being a time-traveling shinobi with a force of nature bound to him by death itself. That all aside though, they had all agreed to keep an eye out for Cinder or any of her cronies while also buckling down on their respective training even more so. If Cinder was really going to attempt some sort of coup, then they were going to put up one hell of a fight. Tusan Ka-chan, this insane! Naruto muttered in exasperation. Sure, he had made significant strides in his understanding of the sealing arts, even more so after putting those scrolls he had taken from Uzushio to use, but the sealing matrix before him was completely beyond anything he had seen before. The worst part was that he wasn't just trying to use the seal, he was going to have to modify it heavily to better fit Pyrrha and Amber's unique situation. At least this is also helping you to better understand the seal that binds us, Kurama intoned from his spot beside his container. Naruto nodded. True, but it means that not only do I have to tweak the hack no Fuenshiki to fit Pyrrha, I also have to create an entirely brand new key for my seal if I ever want to fully be able to use all of your chakra without dying or something. The kitsune-themed Biju hummed in agreement. Looking back now, I can better understand what it is your father did that night. I can only assume he gave the original key to your pervert of a godfather, but any chance we have of getting that key is gone now that we're thousands of years in the future, something I doubt anyone could have predicted. Naruto groaned aloud before falling on his back, the sound echoing throughout the massive underground bunker that housed Amber. This is so frustrating. Kurama, already used to his container's childishness, merely huffed. I would say focus on tweaking the seal as that is the more pressing matter right now. As it stands, you can at least safely use up to 6 tails in our new mode. While Kaguya or whatever shades of her remain are no doubt lying in wait, 6 tails of my chakra is still more than enough to handle most anything. Yeah, and with you free to roam outside of the seal and use a huge chunk of your own power, I doubt Cinder has anything that could challenge you. Naruto agreed. Again Kurama huffed before none too gently smacking the blonde with his tail. Don't think that because I've allowed you to focus on your little girlfriend, I'll allow you to slack off when it comes to loosening our seal. While having most of my power available to me is better than what I've had with either your mother or Mito, I would still like to one day have all of it back. Naruto grinned as he jabbed the shrunken Biju in the side. Don't act like you're not worried about Pyrrha-chan too, Fuzzbutt. She is tolerable, I will admit. Far better suited to you than that pink-haired banshee you chased for so long. Or even that pale-eyed heiress who stalked you from afar. Kurama groused. At the mention of the Hyuga heiress, Naruto unintentionally recalled one of his last encounters with her. Unfortunately, it wasn't exactly a happy memory. Seeing Hinata futilely try and fight pain to try and save him had been shocking considering her normally shy demeanor. To top it off, she then openly confessed not just her admiration for him, but her desire to always be by his side, because she well and truly loved him, watching helplessly as pain literally threw her around like a rag doll hurt. Watching as he then mercilessly killed her had pushed Naruto past the edge. It was the only time Naruto could recall willingly and knowingly giving in to his darker emotions. He had wanted nothing more than to tear pain to shreds, to make him hurt as bad as he was. It had also been the closest he had ever to come fully unleashing a then still hate-filled Kurama. Shaking himself out of his trip down memory lane, Naruto wondered for a brief moment what would have happened had he not been sent into the future. After he had beaten Pain and Nagato had used the last of his energy to revive all of the people he had killed, there had been a brief respite. In that time of celebration, the blonde had thought about Hinata and had even pondered asking her out on a date. Obito's sudden invasion of Konoha and Kakashi sending the Uzumaki Jinchuriki into the future put a bit of a damper on those plans. No use pondering what-ifs. Kurama interjected, already knowing what his partner was thinking. Naruto gave the Biju a small smile in return. Right as usual, fuzzbutt. Kurama grinned in return. I always am. Naruto stretched and yawned as he sat on the edge of his bed. Glancing at the digital clock on the nightstand next to his bed, the blonde was only somewhat shocked to see that it was already going to be 7 p.m. While he wasn't exactly a morning person, waking up so late was unusual even for him. To be fair though, he had been pulling several all-nighters in order to tweak the hack no Fuin Shiki, and seeing as how he had finally finished it, he felt like he deserved a couple hours of sleep. Hearing his scroll begin to vibrate, Naruto checked the screen to see it was a call from Nora. What's up, Nora? Get your butt over here, Captain Whiskers. It's finally Pira's turn to fight. In a blur, the blonde cleaned and dressed himself before running out of the dorm. Who's she up against? The thing is still deciding. As the blonde finally left the dorm building, he was barely able to dodge out of the way of an arrow that had been aimed at his head. Seeing the familiar obsidian arrow lodge deep into the concrete, a pit of dread built up in his stomach. Oh. It looks like Pira's going to be fighting Penny. Cinder smirked as her left eye was engulfed in a ring of fire. Naruto frowned as Kurama's Biju cloak sprung to life. Omake number 8, of First Dates PT1, Rin couldn't help but sigh and shake his head. His friend and captain, someone who almost literally oozed confidence and bravado, was nervously pacing their room while muttering to himself. Briefly, Rin wondered how he always ended up as the so-called straight man in every situation. It seemed to be his role to play in life. Deciding to save his pondering for tea time later, the long-haired teen grabbed his blonde friend by the shoulder, stopping him from possibly digging out a groove in their floor with his pacing. It's going to be fine. This isn't the first time you two have spent time alone, so treat it just like any of those times. And sagely offered. Naruto couldn't help himself as he finally broke down. Yeah, but that was when we were just friends. Now she's my girlfriend. What if it's awkward? What if I totally mess this up and she never wants to speak to me again? All of my male role models have been huge perverts. I don't know how to handle this. Ren massaged the bridge of his nose in an attempt to fend off the incoming headache. Normally I'd say it'd be best to go in with some sort of game plan, but I know that you do better when you wing it. Just be you, and try and show Pira how much I know you care about her. If you can do that, then you'll do fine. Realizing how right Rin was, Naruto calmed down and gave his friend a foxy grin. You're right. You always know just what to say. Pulling out a bouquet of flowers, seemingly from nowhere, Rin shook his head in exasperation. I also know you're just as likely to put your foot in your mouth, so take these. Ignoring the look of betrayal on his captain's face, the pink-eyed teen continued. I've also gone ahead and made a reservation at a fairly high-end restaurant in Vale in your name. If you can at least make it there, you should be fine. Before Naruto could sulk, Nora burst into the room with a grin. May I present to you, Miss Pira Nikos? Naruto's jaw hit the floor while all higher brain functions came to a screeching halt. Red was undeniably Pira's color. Even Naruto, as lacking in fashion sense as he was, knew this. However, he was now realizing that his red-haired partner, now girlfriend, could wear the hell out of black too. Strapless and backless, the black dress that reached to just above her pair of matching black heels fit her flawless figure like a glove. The slit up the right side of it revealed even more of her porcelain skin while also allowing her a little more ease of movement. Instead of her normal pair of brown opera-style gloves, her hands and arms were covered up by a pair of black ones. Her vibrant emerald orbs were accented by the barest amount of purple eyeshadow, contrasting nicely with both her eyes and soft skin. Possibly his favorite part of the entire look was the fact that she had let her hair down, the soft red tresses perfectly framing her face in slight waves. Fiddling with her fingers, Pyrrha offered a nervous smile as she took in her date for the evening. The white dress shirt that did little to hide his lithe yet taut muscles matched with a well-pressed pair of dark gray khakis brought a blush to Pyrrha's cheeks. Wow! Naruto finally managed to breathe out. Pyrrha's blush intensified. Same to you. Anyone else worried either of them will talk the entire time? Yang stage whispered to her friends as the two continued to stare at each other. Weiss rolled her eyes. Knowing the dolt, that might not be a bad thing. Watching the two walk off hand in hand, Yang fake sniffled out. They grow up so fast. For a minute after, no one spoke, admiring the sight of the couple disappearing around the corner. Spy time? Yang grinned. In a blur of motion, Nora was suddenly dressed in a form-fitting all-black stealth outfit. Definitely. Any sort of rebuttal died in his throat when returned, only to see the rest of Team RWBY, even Weiss, wearing matching get-ups. Why do I even bother? Come on, run. We have to make sure this date goes perfectly. The pink-eyed teen resigned himself to a night of hijinks and shenanigans with an all-too-often used shake of his head. Chapter 38. Sparks flew as obsidian clashed against chakra-treated metal, concussive blasts of air following each blow. Sapphire bore into amber as Naruto and Cinder clashed once again, the resulting explosion carving yet another trench into the ground below them. As a result of the two warriors' battle, the area around Beacon's dormitories, once decorated by plenty of greenery and well-made walkways of stone, was now an unrecognizable mess. Deep trenches had been gouged into the earth by both wind and water, the plant life had been consumed by flames, the concrete of the walkways was now indiscernible from the dirt and debris, while deep craters pitted the area. In short, what had once been a spot where many of Beacon's students took time to rest and relax was now nothing but a war zone. And for once, there was either a smirk or grin plastered on Cinder's face, only a thin line. Even as sweat dotted her brow, even as she continued to push her body to fight an empowered Uzumaki Jinchuriki, Cinder couldn't help but feel amazement as Naruto's power kept on climbing. Any time she thought she had the upper edge, he would get that much faster, that much stronger. Any and all of her flames were simply drowned out by a water jutsu. The cutting edges of her glass storms were met by blasts of wind-natured chakra, tearing them asunder. Even her twin obsidian blades chipped and cracked under the pressure of the blonde's powerful swings, forcing her to constantly have to sharpen them. That was nothing to say about the nearly suffocating pressure of the angry orange shroud of chakra the blonde was cloaked in. The only reason she hadn't buckled under its malicious aura was thanks to the stolen half of the maiden's power she was now constantly using. Even still, the stolen power of the maiden was doing nothing to even the gap between them. The only reason she was still alive was thanks to her own years of experience and skill. Despite being years older than him though, Naruto's ferocity and power had let him score several hits that still stung. If it wasn't for her aura shielding her, Cinder was sure that the slash that had cut into her thigh would have otherwise lopped off the limb entirely. The same could be said about the various other cuts that littered her form. Suiton, Suiden no Jutsu, water release, water bullet technique. Rolling out of the way of the highly pressurized stream of water, Cinder came up on a knee, 3 arrows already knocked into her bow. Naruto dodged out of the way of the 3 obsidian arrows, only to be engulfed in the explosion of flames that followed. The flames and smoke were cleared away as a wall of wind exploded outwards, revealing Naruto, a single tail of chakra now swaying behind him. Cinder frowned as she knew that the fight just got that much harder for her. Without so much as a grunt of effort, a clone of the blonde popped into existence, although it lacked the sinister cloak of chakra the original donned. Knowing what it was created for, the doppelganger rushed off, making its way towards Amity Coliseum, scroll in hand as it tried to call any of Naruto's friends. Cinder did nothing, simply watching the clone run off with a smirk. It won't help, she mocked. The smirk was quickly ripped off her face when a fist was plowed into her abdomen, robbing her of all the air in her lungs. With an almost casual palm thrust to the face and a satisfying crunch, the blonde Jinchuriki sent the raven-haired woman flying. I'm done talking, Cinder. I warned you several times. Using the back of her hand to wipe off the blood leaking out of her no doubt broken nose, Cinder shakily got to her feet. Before he could rush the downed woman, Naruto raised his hand, catching a boot in his hand all too easily. The ensuing shot from said boot caused the half-blood Uzumaki to unhand the attacker. Looking at the familiar head of silver hair, Naruto growled. Mercury, the teen said nothing, assuming a ready stance instead. Seeing the one who was partially responsible for Yang's being booted from the tournament, a second tale formed. Revenge was usually Sasuke's thing, but I'm pretty sure Yang wouldn't mind if I kicked your ass for her, was all Naruto said before blurring from sight. Mercury cried out in pain as Kurama's Jinchuriki palmed his face, plowing him straight into the ground with enough force to form another crater. Without even turning around, one of the Biju cloak's tails lashed out, deflecting an arrow aimed for Naruto's back. Turning his crimson eyes back to Cinder, Naruto snarled. In another blur of movement, the blonde lashed out at Cinder with a clawed strike. While the raven-haired woman just barely avoided having her abdomen cut open, she still received 4 shallow lacerations to her stomach, her maroon dress being likewise cut into. As the amber-eyed schemer grimaced in pain and quickly moved a hand to apply pressure to the wounds, Naruto was forced to turn his sights back to Mercury when the silver-haired teen began to fire off a barrage of shots. Despite the speed and accuracy of each individual shot, Naruto was easily able to weave around them. The barrage came to an abrupt end with the now crimson-eyed teen plowing his knee straight into Mercury's jaw. He was given no respite though, the blonde Uzumaki grabbing the silver-haired teen by his feet as he was lifted into the air. With a quick spin, Cinder's henchman was sent careening into the side of a nearby building as if he was launched out of a cannon. Blurring through the necessary hand seals, Naruto was ready to make the rubble Mercury lay in his grave. Katon Enden, fire release, flame bullet. As the ball of flames was just about to engulf the downed Mercury, Cinder erected a wall of her own fire. Seeing as how he hadn't pumped all that much chakra or used a lot of oil in the jutsu, it was promptly overtaken by the stronger flames. Watching the two recollect themselves, Mercury bleeding steadily from his mouth and head while Cinder's previously flawless porcelain skin was now dirted and covered in her own blood in several places, Naruto felt something begin to nag at him. That little voice in the back of his head that said something wasn't right was proven correct when the memories of his clone came rushing back to him. The last thing the clone had seen was a pair of heterochromatic eyes and a mocking smirk. With that, it all finally clicked for the blonde. Cinder saw the look of realization as it visibly dawned on Naruto, and she smirked. Like I said, it's too late. Yet again, Naruto was faced with a decision. Finish off Cinder and Mercury, or attempt to save his friends. Hell, who was he kidding? Friends came first. In a blur, Naruto was gone, hoping to stop whatever plan Cinder had set in motion. Pyrrha panted, taking advantage of the brief respite she had been given. Despite her very innocent and childish appearance, Penny was proving that she was indeed combat ready. Since the start of the match, the ginger-haired girl had kept Pyrrha on her toes, forcing the redhead to pull out all of the proverbial stops. Hell, she had even been forced into actually using her semblance some time ago, a feat only her boyfriend had previously been capable of. Taking a breath to calm her nerves and recenter herself, Pyrrha sprinted at her opponent, eager to resume their match. The redhead of Team NPR twirled out of the way of a vertically spinning blade. Ducking under the one that followed it, Pyrrha leapt upwards, landing on the third blade. Using the spin of the weapon, Penny was sent skipping backwards from a devastating kick to the head. Executing a well-timed backflip off of her pseudo-platform, Pyrrha landed and took a knee, aiming down the sights of Milo now in its rifle form. Penny was able to not only defend herself from the incoming bullets by forming a shield out of her swords, but also keep advancing by causing them to quickly spin. Just as the Elysian girl was but a few yards away, Pyrrha switched up her tactic, sending a crow flying at Penny. What followed caught almost everyone watching the match by surprise. Although Penny easily deflected the spinning shield, she quickly found herself on the defensive as a crow made another pass at her, then another, and another. Many couldn't believe their eyes. It looked like Pyrrha's shield had suddenly gained some form of sentience, relentlessly attacking Penny from all angles. Although the younger Elysian was able to defend herself from the seemingly crazed buzzsaw of a shield, she was having to focus all of her attention and swords on doing so. Seeing an opening, Pyrrha recalled a ko, launching Milo in spear form. To the redhead's surprise, she missed. Sure, it was by a few inches at best, but still, she rarely if ever missed. Shaking her head, Pyrrha decided to ponder on it later. Up in the stands, Ren frowned and leaned forward in his seat. Seeing the look on his face, Nora asked, "What's up, Ren?" "Pyrrha, miss," he answered simply. The other stared at him questioningly. "Sue?" Yang asked, hoping to get Ren to explain. explained he did. Even before we were put on a team together, Pyrrha was a master marksman. Being who she is, Pyrrha obviously wasn't content with just that and continued to better herself. Even Naruto has admitted that she outclasses him in accuracy with both thrown weapons and guns. Nora nodded along, adding, "Didn't she also ask Captain Whiskers to train her on how to use those knives and stars he uses?" Ren simply nodded. "Are you saying something or somebody made her miss?" Weiss asked. Ren narrowed his eyes. "With everything going on right now, and after what happened to Yang, we'd be stupid to not suspect foul play." Realizing just what Ren was getting at, the others turned their eyes back to the fight below. Though it appeared they had gone back to normal, they all sat that much straighter and kept their eyes roaming, looking for any sign of Cinder or her group. Pyrrha mentally cursed. She had missed, again. This time she had overextended a sword swing, aiming for where she had thought Penny's abdomen was, only to strike air. It was a costly mistake, and the Emerald Eye teen had barely managed to avoid being blasted by one of Penny's lasers because of it. Something wasn't right, she knew it, but in the heat of battle, there was little time to ponder on what that something could be. Once more, Pyrrha chose to focus on the fight at hand. Ruby fidgeted in her seat as she watched Pyrrha catch Penny with a shield rush, sending the ginger-haired Atlesian tumbling off the edge of the floating arena. While she very much so cared for Penny, she wished that the android girl would have lost the match then and there. Instead, the team leader of Team RWBY watched as Penny cleverly used the lasers from her swords to boost her back onto the arena. Pyrrha gave her no time to rest either, already waiting for her. Watching as the two continued their bout, Ruby couldn't help but clench and unclench her hands. There was pit in her stomach, a foreboding feeling that told her something wasn't right. The original reason for that had been the fact that she knew what Penny was. Ruby also knew, and had seen firsthand, what Pyrrha's semblance could do to metal. While she knew that Pyrrha was possibly one of the nicest and most caring individuals she had ever met, the silver-eyed teen was also aware of just how easy it was for accidents to happen, especially since Pyrrha herself had no idea about Penny's secret. Ren's observation from earlier only added fuel to the fire. Glancing at the scoreboard that displayed both of their aura levels, Ruby took some solace in seeing that the two of them were coming to the ends of their proverbial rope. Feeling her paranoia peak, Ruby glanced around the arena. Just as she was about to look back at the match, she saw it. Across the way, she saw a familiar head of pink and brown hair with an even more familiar head of spiky blonde hair. Her heart dropped as she saw Neo slide her hidden blade into the blonde's back. However, before she could scream in terror, said blonde went up in a cloud of smoke, meaning it had only been one of Naruto's clones. Neo then looked Ruby directly in the eye and smiled, pointing back down at the match below. This time, there was no scream of terror. In fact, Ruby felt nothing. Her entire body simply went numb. Sure, she could hear the screams of horror, the gasps of shock, and the crying. She could feel her team wrapping her in a group hug. She could even feel the cold wetness of the tears cascading down her face. But it was almost as if the entire world around her had become dull and muted. And then the sobs came, her body violently shaking as her mind finally processed the scene below. Milo clattered to the ground, echoing across the otherwise silent arena. Dropping to her knees, Pyrrha felt herself begin to shake as hot tears bubbled around her eyes. How had this happened? Her mind replayed the last few seconds over and over again, attempting to figure out just where it had all gone wrong. Annoyed by Penny's swords, she had sought to take them out of the equation. Using Milo to test the durability of the wires that connected the various swords to Penny, Pyrrha figured that the cables were a little stronger than the wires Naruto used. Knowing how much force it would take to cut through such durable material, the invincible girl had sent a Ko flying, a blast from her semblance meant to help push the bronze shield through the cable. Inches away, the image, before Pyrrha blurred away, revealing that she hadn't been aiming for one of Penny's cables. In a raw display of brutality, a Ko cut clean through sword, cable, and wielder alike. Like a puppet with its strings cut, the swords clattered to the ground. In an almost poetic way, Penny followed suit, innocent eyes wide with shock as a Ko bisected her. Pyrrha could feel herself begin to shake, unable to tear her eyes away from the sight before her and unable to stop the tears that followed. It was almost as if her own mind was forcing her to behold the atrocities she had wrought with her own two hands. What had she done? And why did her heart hurt so much? Was it for Penny, or was it for herself? No. Shock and horror. It hung in the air like a fog. Naruto hadn't even made it to the airfield, instead having to watch on screen as his girlfriend brutally bisected Penny. Shaking in pure rage, a new name had just made it to the top of his shit list. Emerald. He was sure of it now. She was the one responsible for tricking Young and had now done the same with Pyrrha, this time with a far more grievous outcome. Learning Penny was some sort of man-made android was shocking, sure, but it did nothing to diminish her loss of life. And that was it. Despite her not appearing on Kurama's radar, Penny had a life. She had friends, she could experience what it meant to be alive, and could make her own choices. Penny had been a living being and was viciously taken away from those friends, not by Pyrrha, but by Emerald. And he was going to make sure that she along with Cinder and Mercury got what was coming to them. Revenge plotting later Gaki. Massive amounts of Grimm are heading towards Vale. Kurama roared out. Looking at the screen as Pyrrha sat there, nearly catatonic, Naruto knew what he had to do. Tajikage Bunshin no Jutsu, multi-shadow clone technique. Suddenly, the courtyard Naruto had been standing in was covered in a massive cloud of smoke. As the cloud dissipated, it revealed several hundred copies of the blonde Jinchuriki. As one, the mass of blonde-haired doppelgangers rushed off to Vale, the safety of her citizens their only concern. Any Grimm met along the way was to be disposed of. Sightings of Cinder or any of her henchmen were to be reported back to him. Naruto himself turned his gaze back to the Colosseum floating in the air above Beacon. Kurama was right. Any plans for revenge would need to be put on the back burner. All of his friends, as well as possibly hundreds of civilians and students, were all but trapped up there. Kurama? The chibified Biju turned a questioning gaze to his container. I'm gonna find a way up there. I want you to stay down here though. The grin that stretched across the Kyuubi's maw was downright vicious. With pleasure. With a leap, the small fox kit was engulfed in a ring of flames. Emerging from the inferno was the far more terrifying form of the nine-tailed fox, now as large as a stallion. Letting loose a war cry that shook the surrounding area, Kurama bounded off into the city, ready to bring havoc down upon the invading Grimm. Naruto turned his gaze to the tower that was Beacon's namesake. Briefly he wondered what Ashbin would do with all of this going on. He had felt it before. The unassuming headmaster held a wealth of power in him, the likes of which Naruto more closely likened to that of the shinobi during his time. He highly doubted it was chakra, but whatever it was, Ashbin kept it under tightly bound wraps. Deciding to ponder on what other secrets the enigmatic headmaster still kept, Naruto instead made for the airfield as Vale's sirens sounded off. There would no doubt be ships leaving to the Colosseum to ferry the innocents to safety. That was his ticket up there. What had once been a stadium filled with laughter and smiles, was now a prison to many. It had all happened so fast that almost everyone was still trying to process just what in the world had happened. Seconds after Penny's fall, a voice came over the intercom, a black chess piece being displayed along with it. The following speech only served to further entrench the people in their shock and horror. The real kicker was the almost hard-to-argue truth many of the civilians saw before them. They clearly knew little to nothing of what was being taught to the children they entrusted to the academies. The feminine voice had also raised several points many had been wondering quietly to themselves. Why had Atlas all but invaded Vale with its armed forces? Why did it look like they were gearing up for an all-out war? What was really being kept hidden from them by the powers that be? When the broadcast ended and the jumbotrons went dark, a shocked and stunned silence filled the arena, many unsure of what was happening around them. The blaring horn of Amity Coliseum's defense system was a jarring wake-up call for many. The automated voice that followed it, however, filled everyone with dread. Alert! Incoming Grimm attack! Threat level 9! Screams of terror and panicked cries filled the air as the reality of what was happening set in. People quickly began to vacate their seats and rush towards the exits, pushing and shoving in an act of self-preservation. Ladies and gentlemen, please, there is no need for panic. General Ironwood's voice boomed over the intercom. Whatever semblance of calm Atlas leader tried to invoke was instead met with far more panic as an ear-piercing shriek shook the arena. Perched above them, angrily pecking at the stadium's barrier, was a massive avian monstrosity. While the group of Team RWBY plus Nora and Rin were still struggling to come to terms with what they had seen, their sense of duty quickly overrode their horror. That Nevermore is almost as big as the one we fought in Yuzu! Nora cried in alarm. And it was true, the Nevermore above them was almost large enough to completely obscure their view of the sky above the Colosseum. It's not alone either, Blake added in horror, watching as several dozen smaller Nevermore began to circle the stadium. To everyone's further horror, thanks to the aid of its smaller flock, the Nevermore came plummeting down into the stadium, smashing right through the weakened barrier like it was a pane of glass. The remaining onlookers watched as the porcelain-masked monstrosity lowered its head and glared straight at a still immobile Pyrrha. Opening its beak, it let out a horrifying screech and charged forward. "Pyrrha!" the group cried out, all of them leaping over the railing and racing towards the still catatonic redhead. However, with a single flap of its pitch-black wings, the massive Nevermore created a blast of wind that sent each of them tumbling backwards. As they collected their bearings and made for Pyrrha again, they were stopped yet again, this time by the dozen or so smaller Nevermore that had accompanied the much larger one. Horrified, the others watched as the Nevermore opened its beak, ready to swallow a vulnerable Pyrrha whole. Right as the avian monster was upon her, a blur of rose petals slammed into the charging Nevermore, a shriek of pain following the collision. Wide-eyed, the others watched as a still puffy-eyed Ruby brandished one of Penny's swords. "Leave her alone!" the young teen cried out, her voice still raw and broken from all that had happened. The Nevermore shrieked in defiance of the small human before it. Its defiance was met and returned tenfold as a hail of gunfire was unleashed upon it. Crying in pain, the massive bird-like Grimm took to the air. Shocked, both Ruby and Pyrrha turned to see all of their friends and former opponents from the tournament armed to the teeth, the flock of smaller Nevermore now lying at their feet and quickly fading away. "Let's bring this oversized birdie down to our level." Jester Asgard grinned around his signature candy cane. With a quick dash and help from both his teammate Aizen as well as Yatsuhashi of Team CFVY, the leader of Team Jest was sent barreling at the airborne Nevermore like a cannonball. Unfurling himself from a ball shape, Jester continued to spin, his twin hook blades following his rotation. With a satisfying squelch, the blades lodged themselves deep into the back of the Nevermore, causing it to cry out in pain. Using his weapons like reins on a horse, the hooded leader of Team Jest began to guide the Nevermore back towards awaiting Nora and Aizen. Using his semblance to generate an electrical charge, the taller teen bumped fists with a grinning Nora, sparks dancing between them. As the form of a still screeching Nevermore came barreling towards them, the two powerhouses readied themselves. With a flash of pink and green, Aizen and Nora swung their weapons straight at the Nevermore's mask. The ensuing blast of concussive air almost knocked several of the others onto their butts. The damage done to the Nevermore was far more grievous though. The feathered beast's once pristine mask was now all but shattered into pieces, some of those fragments having been forced into its skull by the force of Aizen and Nora's strike. However, that wouldn't be enough to down such a massive Grimm. Blood dripping from its now visible face, the Nevermore shrieked and attempted to take flight once more. Whatever flight plans the twisted creature had were harshly interrupted as lengths of chain and cloth began to encircle it. Arslan, Blake, and Jester gritted their teeth as they used their respective weapons to bind the massive Grimm. The thing shrieked as it struggled to free itself from the bindings. "Weiss! Up!" The Schneeras simply nodded, weaving a set of glyphs to act as platforms. Yang led the charge, ascending the platforms with ease. Following behind the blonde were Aizen and Nora. Reaching the apex of the glyph-made platforms, the three teens leapt at the still struggling Nevermore. The ensuing unified attack caused the arena floor to split, cracks spider webbing outwards from the point of contact. The others were sent skidding backwards as the blast of air slammed into them. At the center of it, the Nevermore couldn't even let out so much as a dying screech as the top part of its skull was harshly and quickly pulverized and joined to the bottom half, the crunch and crack of bones shattering echoing loudly across the vacant arena. Letting self-satisfied grins stretch across their faces, the three powerhouses shared a quick fist bump before rejoining their friends. Despite the destruction around her, Pyrrha couldn't help but to focus on the bit of cloth she gingerly held between her fingers. Looking into the silver eyes of Ruby, the redhead couldn't help but choke out a sob. "Ruby! I'm so sorry!" For a moment, Ruby's eyes misted over in unshed tears before she steeled herself. Without any sort of hesitation, the shorter teen engulfed a still crying Pyrrha in a hug. "So am I. But it wasn't your fault." Pyrrha only sobbed harder, clutching onto the younger girl. "Ruby's right." Everyone turned, surprised to see Naruto walking up to them with his face set into a frown. Picking up Akko and Milo, he held them out for Pyrrha. "Cinder, Emerald, Mercury, and Neo did this. They're the ones to blame for all of this, and it's our job to stop them." Looking into her boyfriend's glacial sapphire's eyes that held an untold amount of love for her, sorrow for what had happened, and resolve to stop the ones responsible, Pyrrha gathered herself before accepting her weapons. Briefly, Naruto's eyes softened as he gently wiped away the remaining tears on her face. Pyrrha offered a small smile, enjoying the moment and what it meant. The dry roar and flapping of wings interrupted the moment, and drew everyone's attention to the top of the Colosseum. Perched atop the stadium were griffin, monstrous creatures who resembled the unholy union of several different animals. Naruto frowned at the sight of them. He had heard of them and seen descriptions of them in several books, but had never actually seen them in person, which, with his mission track record, was surprising. Hell, he and his team had faced down an ancient and massive Nevermore that could use chakra in its rawest form. Suddenly, what Ashpin had said to him and Pyrrha down in the bunker came to mind. I'm sure you've noticed, the creatures of Grimm are growing stronger, more prevalent. Beasts that have slumbered for decades have awoken. New types of Grimm are appearing. Narrowing his eyes even as the griffin made to attack, Naruto couldn't help but to think that something else was going on. There's no way any of this is a coincidence. Someone else is pulling the strings here, someone who can somehow control the Grimm in some way. Big question is, who are they and what do they want? Deciding to shelve those thoughts for later, the blonde stepped forward, already speeding through a set of seals. A clone popped into existence next to him, already going through its own set of seals. Futon, Daitapa, Wind Release, Great Breakthrough. Katon, Ryukan no Jutsu, Fire Release, Dragon Flame Technique. While the other teens who had never seen Naruto use a jutsu could only stare in awe, his own team and Team RWBY were once more reminded of just how powerful their friend was. Gale force winds fed and directed the searing inferno, engulfing the dozen or so griffin in a tomb of blistering heat and concussive winds. The only sound heard was not the sound of anguished roars, but the crackling of fire and the howling of winds. Stopping his chakra flow to the technique and dispelling his clone, Naruto released a breath. Holy shit, man! Sun Wukong of Team SSSN called out, his jaw near the floor. Suddenly I'm glad you didn't go all out against us. Jester joked. His teammates could only nod in agreement. Taking a quick glance around and stretching his senses further out, Naruto was glad to find that everyone was now on the outer edges of the Colosseum waiting to be ferried to a safe area. Gaki! The white fang is airdropping even more Grimm in. I've taken a few down, but it looks like some are headed your way. Naruto nearly snarled. You guys head to the docks and keep the civilians safe. As the others moved to follow the blonde's orders, he gently grabbed Blake by the arm. The white fang are here and they're releasing even more Grimm into the school and the nearby areas of the city. A few are headed this way as well. A brief flash of sadness crossed the raven-haired girl's face before she looked into Naruto's worried eyes. Neither said anything for a moment. Then Blake reached up and tugged, undoing the ribbon that she used to hide her furry black ears. Naruto only grinned and nodded his head, perfectly understanding what Blake was trying to say. The two shared a brief hug before Naruto turned his eyes to the top of the Colosseum. Grinning, an idea started to form in his devious brain. In a burst of speed, the blonde took Pyrrha by surprise when he scooped her into his arms and began to hop his way up to the top of Amity Coliseum. Although she was caught off guard by her boyfriend, a single glance at the smirk on his whiskered face was enough to let her know that she was needed for one of his crazy ideas. Why the hell did you stop? An angered white fang member yelled to the bullhead's driver. Said driver was beyond confused as he fiddled with every button and switch available to him in an attempt to get the bullhead moving again. It's not me! Something stopped us dead in the air. These doors aren't going to hold the Grimm much longer. We need to drop this cargo or we're dead. I'm trying, man. As the two went back and forth, trying their damnedest to get the bullhead moving again, either noticed the gargantuan form of an opaque dragon head rushing towards them. The gaping maw of the chakra-born dragon slammed into the flying vehicle with all the force of a speeding train, causing it to crash into another bullhead that had been likewise stopped in the air. The ensuing explosion lit up the night sky. Pyrrha panted and took in some much-needed gulps of air as sweat dotted her brow. While she had recently taken to training her semblance on a much grander scale, holding two bullheads aloft, even for short periods, was not exactly the easiest thing ever. Knew you could do it, Pyrrha-chan. Naruto cheered with a grin. The redhead blushed under the praise. Now you rest while I take care of the rest. Pyrrha all too happily obliged, knowing just as well that she was going to need all the aura she could gain back for what was to come. Katon, Carrier Endin, Fire Release, Dragon Flame Bomb. Looking on as her partner let loose a stream of white flames in the shape of the mythic beast of fire, Pyrrha was sure that any of the white fan that escaped the attack would no doubt turn and run. Meanwhile, down below the couple, the rest of their friends and fellow students were making quick work of the few Grim and White fan members that had managed to get past Naruto and Pyrrha. General Ironwood looked on in pride as he watched RWBY and Weiss make quick work of an alpha. Turning, he frowned as a small handful of creeps slipped past the group of teens. The Elysian general reached into his coat. In one swift movement born from years of experience, Ironwood leveled a gleaming revolver at the rushing Grim and pulled the trigger. 5 gunshots were heard and 5 Grim fell. Without even blinking, the general then pointed the barrel of his gun straight up, jamming it into the mouth of the Beowulf that had tried to sneak up on him. Blood splattered across the roof and floor of the Colosseum as the body of the now headless Grim flopped to the floor. Holstering his gun, Ironwood regarded the teens before him with no small amount of pride. The last of the civilians are currently being ferried to a safe zone in Vale, and no Grim or White fan member remains here. You've done your kingdoms proud this day. With a flawless about-face, Ironwood began to board a waiting ship with an entourage of Elysian knights. Now I must go reclaim my ship from the vagabond who has captured it. What about us? What should we do? RWBY inquired. Before the Elysian general could answer, a blur of red and yellow landed next to them. Gently putting his girlfriend back on her feet, Naruto answered. Simple, we head back to Beacon and do our jobs and put down this invasion. Bright sapphires met cold blues as Naruto stared Ironwood down. After a brief moment, the elder huntsman nodded his head. Without a word more, the general boarded his ship and flew off. Come on guys, there's still one last ship waiting for us. The gathered group of students nodded and followed after the blonde without hesitation. Ren gazed at the sight below him with shaking fists. Looking out from the large glass windows of the transport ship they were on, all he could see were decimated buildings going up in flames as Grim and White Fang laid siege to Vale. Grinding his teeth, the long-haired teen couldn't help but let his mind compare the sights before him and the one he had seen as a child. Ren. Feeling a familiar arm grip his, Ren allowed his muscles to unclench as he stared into the worried eyes of his longtime friend. It's just so similar to what happened back then. And just like back then, I'm just as helpless to stop it. Nora smiled sadly as she perfectly understood the turmoil Ren was going through. After all, she had been there that day too. You're right, it is similar, but there's some big differences too. Nora pointed to a father clutching onto his 2 children atop a destroyed building. Ren's eyes widened in horror as the poor man could only hold his children as Beowulf surrounded him, each salivating at the mouth. As the magenta-eyed teen made to look away, Nora forced him to watch. Before he could scream at his friend, several blurs of orange attacked the Grim. As the Grim fell, the blurs were revealed to be copies of his blonde captain. The clones then approached the crying family before helping to ferry them away. Again Nora moved her finger, this time pointing at what seemed to be a massive gathering of various Grim. The monstrous creatures were so clumped together, it was hard to tell where one began and another ended, creating a somewhat repulsive blob. Curiously, Ren watched as the mass of black and white began to writhe and undulate. In the blink of an eye, the entire area erupted into a hellish inferno, the flames of which reached high into the sky. As quickly as it had come, the pyre was gone, revealing the grinning visage of Kurama. The voice of his friend and Captain Jared ran from his thoughts, and the sight of the QB happily tearing his way through hordes of Grim. And it's not just me and Kurama. Our teachers, fellow students, and veteran huntsmen are out there fighting for our home, and, as soon as we land, the rest of us will be doing the same. Ren gave a firm nod, taking in the faces of his teammates, as they offered him their support. With a grin, Naruto held up a closed fist. The long-haired male of Team NNPR bumped fists with his captain, Nora and Pyrrha joining to show their solidarity. A nearby explosion tore the 4 teens from their heartfelt moment. Wide-eyed, each of the teens on board watched as the ship that General Ironwood had been manning was engulfed in flames and sent plummeting to the ground below. Not so surprisingly, it was RWBY who was the first one to react, already racing to the bay doors. Just as unsurprisingly, Weiss was the one to reach for her partner and captain. What do you think you're doing, you dolt? Abashed, RWBY sunk into her cloak and squeaked out. Going to help reclaim General Ironwood's ship? Weiss stared at her sheepish captain for a moment before shaking her head with a sigh. Not without me you aren't. RWBY cheered, causing Weiss to groan at her childish captain. Hey! Jan shouted, catching both RWBY and Weiss off guard. For a moment, the blonde stared at her sister, and teammate with concern before offering a determined nod. "Be safe out there and come back to us. Watch each other's backs," Blake offered. Ruby and Wise shared a grin. "We will!" And just like that, the two leapt out the back of the transport ship. Naruto placed a reassuring hand on his fellow blonde's shoulder. "Ruby is strong on her own, but her and Wise together are a force to be reckoned with. They'll be fine, I promise you," Naruto said with all the confidence he had in his friends. Yang gave the whiskered teen a nod and a grin. Looking back at the approaching sight of Beacon, Naruto turned to address the rest of the teens on board. "We're almost there, guys." Taking a tight grip on Hino Ishii, the blonde slammed the butt of the staff onto the floor. "Let's show these teams just how strong we are together." While the foreign slur flew over most of their heads, the message came through loud and clear. A thunderous cheer shook the ship as each of the students took up their own weapons, preparing themselves physically and mentally for the literal war zone they were about to drop into. Pyrrha felt a frown cross her features as she watched her fellow students and teammates race off to fight the enemy. She wished she could join them now, to lend her strength to both her comrades and her kingdom, but the sight of a waiting Ashbin served to remind her that she had her own unique role to play in all of this. "Have you made your decision, Ms. Nikos?" the silver-haired headmaster asked all too casually. "About that," Naruto interjected. Reaching into his jacket, the former shinobi turned huntsman revealed a scroll, scrawled on which was a complex series of symbols, squiggles, and lines. While it might look like a mess of black ink to some, those in the know would be able to recognize the similarities between the seal on the piece of paper and the one on Naruto's lower abdomen. However, as many similarities as there were just as many differences. The most glaring of which was the obvious incorporation of some of the Schnee family's glyphs. "I think I know of a better way to give Pyrrha the Fall Maiden's powers," the blonde continued. For a moment Ashbin said nothing, intently staring at the parchment before him. Finally, a small grin broke out across the habitual coffee drinker's face. "A seal created by combining the shinobi art of Fuinjutsu and the glyphs of the Schnee family. Truly an impressive work of arcane arts, both past and present." Naruto and Pyrrha were gobsmacked. "You know about the shinobi?" Turning, the elder huntsman began to lead the two teens to the waiting elevator. "A tale for another time, we have more pressing matters. Would it be possible to create a shadow clone to perform this ritual? As much as both Ms. Nikos and myself would like to have you present, you would be far more valuable to veil out on the front lines with your partner Kurama." Naruto felt his jaw nearly unhinge itself. Yeah, I can do that." Ashbin nodded gratefully. "Worry not, after this ordeal is dealt with, you and I will be having a long talk, Mr. Uzumaki." Shaking off his shock, the blonde former shinobi turned to his girlfriend, taking her hands in his own. The pair shared a wordless moment, simply staring into the other's eyes with all the passion and love they could muster. "Be safe out there," Pyrrha finally said. Naruto offered a foxy grin in return. "They won't know what hit em." The couple parted ways after a chaste yet tender kiss. As soon as the elevator door closed, Naruto's normally warm blue eyes froze over. In a burst of flames, Kurama appeared next to his container and partner. "I've managed to clear out areas of both Grim and White Fang alike. Plus, it seems the Grim are also able to sense chakra to some extent, at least my chakra, seeing as how they now refuse to go anywhere near where it lingers." Walking out of the tower, Naruto easily bisected the creep that attempted to ambush him. In the same motion, the blonde sheathed Hino Ishii and transformed it into its rifle mode, blowing holes into the pack of Beowulfs that followed. "That makes sense seeing as how your chakra is pretty toxic to anything that isn't you or me." Casually keeping pace with Naruto and without breaking stride, Kurama sent one of his tails tunneling through the skull of an attacking Ursa. At the same time, another of his tails slammed into the chest of an alpha mid-leap. The last sound it made was a pathetic whimper as its entire chest cavity was forcefully expelled from its body. The two only paused in their walk as a small army of various Grim came crawling out of the surrounding buildings. While Naruto had no outward reaction to the mass of black beasts, Kurama allowed a predatory grin to stretch across his maw. "Suetun, Daibakufu no Jutsu, water release, giant vortex." Having poured a hefty amount of chakra into the jutsu, it came as no surprise to Naruto when the gargantuan wall of water rose to the height of some of the nearby buildings. The resulting wave all but decimated both the Grim and the surrounding area. Seeing some of the Goliaths that survived the torrential jutsu rising to their feet, Naruto chained together another set of hand seals. "Dotun, Yomi Numa, Earth Release, Swamp of the Underworld. Using the water left over from his last attack, the blonde captain of Team NNPR turned several blocks of Vale into a dark and mud-filled swamp. Kurama simply sat and watched as the remaining Grimm struggled to free themselves from the chakra-infused mud only to find themselves sinking further in. The Kitsune-themed Biju chuckled darkly as he could sense what was happening to the Grimm that now found themselves fully buried beneath the surface. Death by suffocation or being slowly crushed by the sheer weight and pressure of the chakra-infused mud. Definitely not a pleasant way to go. As the two turned to leave, they were met by an approaching regiment of the new Elysian Knights. The two shared a confused look at the appearance of the robotic soldiers. Admittedly, the pair had very little interaction with the Elysian forces, though they now found themselves somewhat put off by them. Technology had never really been something Naruto really paid all that much attention to, and that was during his time where the Land of Snow's trains were considered high-tech. Being faced with human-like automatons that held no emotion, no chakra, and no sense of self was not something Naruto nor Kurama were comfortable with. It was all just wrong to the two who were so closely tied to nature. Whatever reservations they had about the robots were forgotten when the knights raised their rifles at them. Looking at the glowing red visors on the mechanized warriors' helmets gave Naruto all the info he needed to figure out what was about to happen. Oh, you've got to be shitting M-. Gunfire echoed throughout the streets. Chapter 39. That's number 23 for me. Gonna have to do better to keep up with me, Nora. Yang called out with a wolfish grin as she punched the head of a knight clean off its shoulders. The blonde's grin fell when she saw Nora unleash a full round of shells upon a group of Grimm. The creatures could do nothing but roar in pain as they were engulfed by the earth-shaking explosion. Glancing at the fading bodies of the nature-born monsters, Nora counted on her fingers. That's 41-3, a 47 for me. Yang felt her eye twitch even as she brutally elbowed the white fang member who attempted to sneak up on her. Turning on her heel, she sent the poor fool sailing with a boot to the chest. 24 for me then! The two destructive teens carried on with their carnage-fueled game. However, they weren't the only ones taking out scores of Elysian mechs, Grimm, and white fang members. All around them their fellow students were working their respective asses off to turn the tide of battle. Working in sync with each other, Team Jest had made quick work of various Grimm of all sizes. They had even managed to put down two of the attacking paladins thanks to Aizen's raw strength and Jester's ability to dance around them. Team CFVY was quickly racking up their own body count. Swathes of enemies fell to Coco's Gatling gun. Any of the poor sods who managed to survive her rain of gunfire found themselves on the receiving end of the Fox, Velvet, and Yatsuhashi trio. Already, the older team had managed to fell a handful of Goliath teams. SSSN and ABRN were carrying their own weight just as well. Arslan Altan and Sun Wukong teamed up to create a deadly pair of close-range fighters capable of toppling even a paladin. Meanwhile Blake and Ren, left to their own devices, were proving their own mettle. Utilizing their dexterity, they became a rapid response unit. They were always where they needed to be, always ready to fight. Blake still had some qualms about fighting against members of the White Fang. Here they were though, threatening all she had come to hold dear. That was all the reason she needed to quash those feelings. She'd found a new family, she wouldn't let them fall to her old one. Using the broadside of Gamble's shroud, Blake knocked a Fang member unconscious. Doing a quick scan of the battlefield, she then caught sight of an Alpha heading back towards the lunch hall. Knowing that some people were still being evacuated from Beacon's campus, Blake chased after the Grimm. Rounding the corner, the sound of an all-too-familiar voice stopped her dead in her tracks, the threat of the Alpha forgotten. As she turned her head to confirm it was who she thought it was, Blake prayed with every fiber of her being that she was wrong, that he wasn't here. Any doubts she had were washed away when she caught the gleam of Wilt's angry crimson blade as it was plunged into the sternum of a wide-eyed Elysian student. Blood splashed against the floor as Adam Taurus ripped his sword free of the student's rib cage with all the delicacy of a butcher. "No!" Blake whispered out in morbid horror as her former partner turned his gaze to her. Adam could only grin as he laid eyes on the partner who had left him stranded on a Schnee-loaded transport train almost 2 years ago. Without tearing his gaze away from her, he used Blush his scabbard-rifle to knock another Elysian student to his feet. With a vicious grin on his face, the horned Faunus planted his boot firmly onto the struggling student's face, grinding it in. "Hello, my darling!" A shiver of disgust crawled along Blake's skin as she unconsciously took a step back. "What's wrong? Aren't you happy to see me after all this time apart, my love? Seeing the amber-eyed faunus shakily begin to back away, an ugly frown crossed Adam's face. Running away again? Is that what you've become? A coward! Still, struggling to get her body to listen to her, Blake could only ask, Why are you here? Why are you doing all of this? Adam sneered in response. You and I were going to change the world, remember? We were destined to the light fires of revolution. Switching his grip on Wilt, Adam made to plunge it into the crying Elysian student's body, just as he had done to the previous one. Consider this, the spark. The faces of her teammates, and the friends she had made during her stay at Beacon flashed through Blake's mind. However, the image of a pair of cerulean eyes stared back at her. The will and determination that they carried served to remind her of the reason she now fought for. An inner fire roared to life inside her. Blake exploded into a flurry of motion, Gamble's shroud clashing against Wilt, the blade's respective owners glaring into the other's eyes. I'm not a coward and I'm not running, not anymore. Blake all but growled out. Adam looked into his former partner's eyes, ready to find the frailty and indecisiveness that was usually there. What he found instead was cold determination glaring back at him. With a cry of effort, Blake shoved Adam back, quickly lashing out with a flurry of swipes from Gamble's shroud's blades. Still thrown off by the difference in Blake, Adam quickly found himself on the defensive as he tried to regain his footing. Enough! Adam roared out, using his superior strength and blush to swat aside one of Blake's slashes. Having put her off balance, he plowed his foot into Blake's sternum, sending her stumbling backwards. Brandishing Wilt with a sneer of disgust, the bull faunus stalked towards his former partner. I don't know where you found this courage, but I'll make sure to hunt down whoever gave it to you, and strangle the life out of them. Still recovering, Blake gave a half-assed swipe to buy her some time. Adam was having none of that. Easily batting the sorry excuse of an attack away, he then moved in close. Blake found herself gasping for air as Adam wrapped a hand around her throat. I will hunt down and destroy everything you love with my own 2 hands. Then, you'll be all mine once again, my darling. Blake refused to back down, though. She stared straight into the eye holes of Adam's mask with an intense defiance and rage, one that was quite unlike her. I won't let you! A knee to his abdomen forced Adam to release his grip on Blake. Gulping in some much-needed oxygen, the teen fauna steadied herself and brandished Gamble's shroud. At one point in my life, I loved you, Adam. I thought the world of you and would have followed you anywhere. Finally gaining back her footing, Blake stood tall. But now I see you for who really are, a monster whose only goal in life is an endless pursuit of revenge and a world where everyone bows to your every whim. You don't care about faunus rights or about equality, you only care about yourself. Adam said nothing as Blake shouted at him, as she attempted to verbally tear him a new one. Once she was done, the bull faunus shook his head. I don't know who filled your head with this nonsense, but I'll be sure to help set you straight when this is all over. While she had long since accepted how twisted Adam had become, Blake could only stare aghast at how delusional he sounded. That shock cost her. A horrid crack was heard as Adam quickly closed the gap between them and smashed Blake across the head with blush, sending her sprawling to the floor. Yang panted as she caught her breath, finally getting a small respite after her little game with Nora. The two of them had managed to take out a bulk of the enemy forces. The others could now take over while she and Nora took a moment to rest. Yet, as the blonde bombshell watched her friends and fellow students put down more enemies, she felt something off. Scouring the courtyard, Yang realized what that feeling was. Blake was missing. Hey, Nora! Catching her attention, Yang continued. Have you seen Blake around? Nora took a moment to think to herself. The last time I saw her, she was headed towards the lunch hall. I think she was chasing after an alpha. Yang knew Blake was a formidable, experienced warrior. However, her instincts were whispering to her that something was wrong. With a furrowed brow and a concerned frown, the blonde set off towards the burning lunch hall. I'm gonna go check on her, be back! Yang shouted to Nora. So concerned for her partner, Yang didn't wait to see if Nora even heard her. Yang weaved around the few straggling Grimm that remained in a bid to save some energy. She could feel the voice of her instincts growing louder till it was all but shouting at her to find Blake. The sight she came upon stopped her dead in her tracks. Peering through the shattered window pane of the lunch hall, Yang saw Blake sprawled out on the floor, parts of her wavy locks now dyed a deep crimson from her own blood. Looking up, she saw the one responsible as he pinned her partner with a foot on her chest and a blade held high, looming over the cat faunus like a guillotine. Before the logical part of her brain even knew what was happening, the instinctual part of her had activated her semblance, and began to fire off a barrage of shells from Ember Celica. Get the fuck away from her! Despite the gravity of the situation as well as the literal war going on around them, Pyrrha couldn't help but blush in embarrassment. Here she was, laid out on the cold floor of the Academy's secret bunker, clad only in her skirt, boots, gloves, and her chest bindings as her boyfriend's shadow clone painted an intricate array of glyphs and symbols onto her lower abdomen. While this was far from the first time Naruto had seen her in such clothing, they did train together near every day. It didn't help that she also had the scrutinizing gaze of her headmaster on her as well. Looking to her immediate right, any sense of embarrassment died when saw the still form of Amber. The comatose fall maiden already had what the shadow clone referred to as a new and highly modified version of the Hak no Fuin Shiki inscribed on her abdomen as well. While she had no idea what any of the symbols meant or the intricacies of the process, her boyfriend's clone had explained the basics of what was supposed to happen and what the end result would be, mostly to assuage her worries. Still, it was comforting to know that she could gain the power of the Fall Maiden while retaining who she was. Amber would even get to live on, albeit as a spirit inside of Pyrrha. The catch to this would be that she technically would not become the Fall Maiden herself. This meant that wielding the Seasonal Maiden's powers would not come as easily. She would have to put that much more effort into training to use them while cooperating with Amber. Thankfully, Ashbin assured the both of them that there should be no issues in gaining Amber's cooperation. In a fit of childish jealousy, Naruto's clone muttered something about her having it easier than he did. Pyrrha let go of the breath she was holding as the clone leaned back, heaving out a sigh. Finally done! Ashbin took a moment to survey the two sealing arrays, verbally noting the differences between the one on Amber and the one on Pyrrha. The clone answered as it began to draw up the necessary chakra for the ritual. Well, the seal on Pyrrha is way closer to the one that keeps Kurama tied to the boss, but the one on Amber is actually closer to the Shiki Fujin, Dead Demon Consuming Seal, and Edo Tensei, Impure World Resurrection. At the mention of the two kinjutsu, Ashbin glared at the clone. Explain. Now. The steel in the normally lax headmaster's voice caught even Pyrrha off guard and caused her to glance at her boyfriend's clone in concern. While the clone was surprised by the fact that Ashbin apparently knew what the two kinjutsu were, it quickly explained what it meant to put any of the silver-haired headmaster's fears at ease. Boss had to figure out a way to move Amber's soul into Pyrrha. There are a few jutsu he knew of that had to do with souls and stuff, but the only two he had access to were the Edo Tensei and Shiki Fujin. So, he tore apart the two jutsu to find out how it was they actually moved a soul into another vessel. The Shiki Fujin wasn't much help seeing as how the Shinigami was the one actually moving the souls, but the Edo Tensei was a little more helpful. Does he know how to perform either jutsu? Ashbin asked with a serious frown on his face. The clone grimaced. Well, theoretically? Yes. He had to dig into the two jutsu so he could understand how they worked, but the boss never actually used either of them, nor does he intend to. The bespectacled headmaster heaved a sigh as he massaged the bridge of his nose. If it were anyone else, I would fear the horror those two jutsu would bring upon this world once again, but I trust Mr. Uzumaki to keep to his word. It is his Nindo after all, isn't it? The familiarity and casual ease with which Ashbin mentioned Naruto's way of life made the clone pause in shock. Caught completely flat-footed, something that was happening pretty often tonight, the clone uneasily nodded. Yeah? Ashbin nodded and gestured to the two young women on the floor. Proceed. The clone nodded, stringing together several hand seals in quick succession before slamming both hands onto the ground between Amber and Pyrrha. An intricate array of seals flowed out from where the clone's hands touched the ground, forming a sprawling spiral of black ink. Out from the main spiral came a simple line of the same ink-like substance, connecting the two young women and their seals to it. With another burst of chakra and a grunt of effort, all three sealing arrays began to glow a vibrant blue. A low hum began to ring throughout the room, growing steadily louder yet maintaining a gentle and soothing tone to it. Pyrrha's brow furrowed as her whole body was suddenly overcome by a strange feeling. The sensation was either comfortable or uncomfortable, simply odd. If she had to, she would be hard-pressed to find any words that described whatever it was her body was feeling. Meanwhile, for a brief moment at least, Amber seemed to awaken, her eyes fluttering open. The only one to notice it was Ashbin. The two stared into the other's eyes, an unspoken, but much-needed conversation taking place. The moment was made all the more heart-clenching when the young woman looked at him with eyes filled with curiosity and forgiveness, as if she knew what was about to happen to her. The next moment they closed shut as the seal on her stomach began to glow a dull yellow. Following that, the glow that no doubt represented Amber's soul and maiden powers began to make its trek across the sealing array that Naruto still had his hands on and into the one on Pira's lower abdomen. Ashpin's fascination with the entire process was ground to a sudden halt as his instincts alerted him to an incoming threat. In a move born from years of experience, the silver-haired headmaster spun on his heel and struck out with his cane, shattering an obsidian arrow. To his horror, though, he watched almost in slow motion as the obsidian dust that had made up the arrow reformed into a dozen smaller shards. They moved far faster than he was prepared for. Turning around, Ashpin's eyes widened. Naruto's clone stared down at the obsidian needles that littered his form before erupting into a cloud of smoke. A gasp of pain drew Ashpin's gaze to Pira, who was grimacing and grabbing at her stomach as she was suddenly overcome with a less than pleasant feeling of something trying to fight its way out of her. Thankfully, the spike of pain was brief as the ethereal aura of the maiden's powers began to leak out of the seal. Once the entirety of it had gathered into an amorphous blob of energy, it lingered for a moment, seemingly debating its choices before racing to join its other half. In that moment, Cinder felt a euphoric grin stretch across her face as she was cocooned by the full warmth of the Fall Maiden's powers. Flames began to circle around her form, lifting her off the ground as both her eyes were lit with an inferno of power. Ashpin knew full well what had to happen now. The headmaster barked out at the still recovering Pira. "Leave here! Go get Naruto, Crow, any of them! The tower must not fall!" Struggling to collect herself, Pira spared a glance at the taunting smirk on Cinder's face before steeling herself. "I can help, though!" Before the redhead could even move to collect her weapons, Cinder fired off a beam of searing flames straight at her. Pira could do nothing but stare in horror as the concentrated conflagration roared towards her. However, what followed made her realize just how out of her depth she was. A transparent and opulent green shield of pure energy formed around her as Ashpin slammed the butt of his cane into the floor with enough force to shatter it. The flames battered the shield, but were ultimately unable to break the aura-made structure. The marble floor around the headmaster and his student was not spared, though, turned into a liquid sludge under the intense heat of Cinder's attack. As the inferno finally died out, Ashpin repeated his orders. "Go! Now! You'll only get in the way." Pira found herself at a loss for words, now realizing why her headmaster and general was calling for backup from someone like her captain. With only a nod, she used her semblance to collect her armored corset and weapons before racing towards the elevator. Cinder allowed the redhead to leave unimpeded this time, her eyes trained on Beacon's headmaster, who was attempting to bore a hole into her skull with a glare alone. "This whole time, right beneath our feet. She was right about you, such arrogance." When Ashpin didn't rise to her taunts, Cinder scoffed. "An arrogance that will now cost your students their lives." Ashpin's glare intensified as he switched his grip on his cane, now wielding it like a sword. However, the ground began to shake, causing him to stumble slightly. Confused by the odd tremor, Ashpin felt a cold pit of dread form in his chest as Cinder seemed wholly unperturbed by the quake. "She didn't," the headmaster whispered in horror. The new Fall Maiden shrugged as flames began to circle her again. "She felt that he's been asleep for far too long." Ashpin's grip on his cane tightened. "Naruto, do what you must." Futon, Shinkahal, wind release, vacuum wave. A compressed stream of wind cut clean through a dozen Elysian knights with ease, tearing the mechanized soldiers into scrap metal. Unsheathing the blade of Hai no Ishi, Naruto spun in a circle with the blade held outwards. Futon, Kazakiri no Jutsu, wind release, wind cutter technique. The area around the blonde was torn to shreds. Invisible blades of wind sliced clean through the Elysian robots as well as the buildings behind them. Sheathing his weapon, Naruto surveyed the area around him, taking in the raw destruction he had unleashed. Needless to say, not a Grim or Elysian knight moved. "Been a while since I've had to use so many jutsu like this." Kurama padded up to his partner and shared in the view of destruction. "Probably been even longer since this world has seen jutsu of such potency." The brief moment of respite was ruined as the memories of a dispelled clone slammed into Naruto. Turning to look at the tower where he had just left Ashpin and Pira, the blonde growled out, "Cinder!" Leaping up to the rooftops, the blonde Uzumaki began to race towards the tower. However, midway through his trek, he had to right himself as a tremor shook the earth. Gaki, this can't be good, Kurama intoned as he felt his negative emotion sense suddenly overcome by what could only be described as a massive blight given sentience. Turning to look at what his Biju partner was talking about, Naruto stared in curiosity, as huge chunks of mountain glen began to fall to the earth with each tremor. Thanks to his enhanced vision, the former shinobi could just make out blotches of black and white moving around inside of the crumbling mountain. A string of curses slipped past the blonde's lips as Mount Glen all but exploded outwards. From within the bowels of the mountain emerged a horrid and twisted creature of nightmares, its blackened form and white bone-like armor making it clear that this was some ancient grim coming out of a deep slumber. Even as far from it as they were, both Kurama and Naruto could sense the literal weight of its aura as it unfurled its wings and took flight. A horrid, ear-piercing screech echoed for miles as the grim wyvern opened its maw all the way down to its throat. Looking at the approaching behemoth of a grim, Naruto simply asked, "Think you can take it, Kurama?" The Kitsune Biju licked his chops, crimson eyes alight with excitement. "I am the mighty Kyubi no Kitsune. Of course I can take this thing." Without needing any further goading, Kurama began to gallop across the rooftops, his form becoming progressively less corporeal and more chakra-based with each second. In the blink of an eye, the Biju had crossed the entirety of Vale and made it to its outskirts. With a mighty roar of power that echoed throughout the entire city, Kurama leapt into the air. The deep orange flames of the Biju's chakra lit up the night sky before they coalesced into the towering and gargantuan form of the Kyubi no Kitsune, fully unleashed. 9 tails whipped to and fro, slamming into the ground with enough force to cause earthquakes. Opening his maw, Kurama let loose another roar that was sure to be heard across the entire continent of Sanis. Without any sort of preamble, the unleashed chakra beast launched himself at the grim wyvern, tackling it out of the air. The ancient nightmare let loose its own screech as it beat its bat-like wings and attempted to sink its teeth into its opponent's throat. Kurama put a stop to that, using one of his many tails to bludgeon the pinned grim across its gaping jaw. In answer, the twisted creature let loose a stream of green, gaseous flames, the acrid scent of which could be smelled from within Vale. The Kyubi roared in pain as the acidic inferno ate away at his form. Released from the 9 tails hold, the wyvern took to the air once more. Naruto spared one last glance at the battling titans before racing back towards the CCT tower. Whoa! RWBY openly gawked at the sight of Kurama duking it out with the monstrous grim that had emerged from empty Glen. "RWBY, pay attention! We're approaching the airship!" Wise snapped. Though, internally, she had to agree with her captain. Sure, Naruto had made it clear that Kurama was a force of nature unto himself, power and chakra given form and sentience. But to actually see what had once been a tiny fox kid take the form of a beast the size of a mountain, and literally shake the earth with each of his steps was as beyond belief as it was terrifying. Still, she and RWBY had their own mission to complete, while the 2 titans of raw power and destruction duked it out. Gripping the controls in her hand, the Shin'i heiress mentally thanked her sister for having given her a rough crash course on flying an Elysian ship. Sure, that had been years ago and she had never actually had any sort of formal training. But she had managed to get herself and RWBY airborne, so that made it okay. Right? "Oh God, they're rubbing off on me," Weiss gasped in horror. She really needed to spend less time with that blonde knucklehead and her captain after this. Bringing herself back to the task at hand, Weiss turned to her captain. "Ready?" RWBY looked outside the window of the ship they had commandeered, to see the last remaining Elysian airship to their side. Steeling herself, the silver-eyed teen nodded. "Ready!" Pressing a button, Weiss opened the bay doors of their ship, grabbed Murdernaster and leapt out, followed closely by the rose-petal form of her captain using her semblance. Using her GLPYHS, Weiss landed on the moving airship with all the poise and grace she was known for. RWBY landed just as easily next to her, Crescent rose at the ready. "There should be an access hatch up ahead," Weiss called out over the roar of the winds. RWBY simply nodded her head and began to make her way forward. Much to the annoyance of both, a small flock of Nevermore accompanied by a single griffin swooped down, blocking their path. The partners exchanged a brief glance, wordlessly agreeing on a plan of attack. Weiss stepped forward, seamlessly weaving together a sizable glyph that burned in hues of red and orange in front of them. RWBY followed that up by transforming Crescent Rose into its scythe mode and using its blade to anchor it into the ship. The flock of Nevermore shrieked in pain as a volley of baseball-sized fireballs consumed them. However, the griffin easily shrugged off the small flames and charged forward, its bone-white beak opened wide. Without so much as a flinch, Weiss twirled, Murdernaster glowing a vibrant purple. Right as the griffin was only a few feet from her, the Schnee heiress touched the tip of her rapier to the ground, the gravity glyph she and Naruto had developed coming to life below the grim. Within the blink of an eye, the monstrous black nightmare was ground to a halt. The next second it collapsed to the ground, struggling in vain against the increase of gravity. What followed wasn't exactly pleasant. The creature roared in agony as it clawed at the ground in an attempt to escape the increasing pressure. As Weiss powered a little more aura into the glyph, the sound of bones being snapped echoed. A pitiful squawk left the Grim's beak before its insides were liquefied and its bones turned into a fine powder. Before either RWBY or Weiss could comment on the brutality of the glyph, a flash briefly stunned them. Blinking out the spots in their vision, the members of Team RWBY donned a frown. Standing before them with her signature grin and a scroll in hand was Neo, garbed in a no doubt stolen at Legion military uniform. As if to disprove their theory on where the pint-sized teen had gotten the uniform, a wave of light rippled over her body, revealing the outfit she usually wore. The mute then winked at them. RWBY and Weiss gripped their respective weapons tighter. After Yan had been expelled from the tournament, and Naruto revealed that Cinder and her gang were pulling the strings, and after Pira had disciplined him for keeping secrets again, the whiskered captain had given them the rundown on what to expect from the opposition. While he knew next to nothing about Emerald and Mercury's semblance at the time, he was intimately acquainted with Neos. Fighting against someone who could create very realistic mirages was not going to be easy, especially with as nimble as the diminutive teen was. "Snowstorm!" RWBY called out, already speeding towards Neo with Crescent Rose powering her forward. Weiss said nothing, creating a glyph array that glowed a bright white behind her. Neo easily slid under RWBY's swipe, expecting the Schnee heiress to be left wide open. Instead, a heavy gust of wind carried a veritable wall of snow and ice straight into her, sending the parasol wielder tumbling back towards a waiting RWBY. As Crescent Rose was about to bite into her, Neo exploded into so many shards of glass. The two members of Team RWBY were punished brutally for their mistake. Roman suddenly appeared and smashed his cane into RWBY's cheek while Neo plowed her foot into Weiss' exposed back. "Well, look what we have here, Neo, Little Red and Ice Queen trying to play heroes," Roman taunted. Neo tilted her head, slowly approaching the downed teens with her parasol on her shoulder, silently mocking them. Weiss was the first to react, lashing out with a salvo of ice shards from a glyph. Her aim struck true only for Neo to seemingly go up in smoke. The Schnee heiress cried out in pain as the pint-sized girl appeared right in front of her and kicked her wrist, knocking Murdenaster out of her hand. A brutal snap kick to the jaw followed and sent the snow-haired teen tumbling. "Weiss!" RWBY cried out, already swinging Crescent Rose into motion. Neo used the handle of her parasol to hook herself onto the massive scythe and hitch herself a ride. Using the momentum of the multi-purpose weapon, the heterochromatic-eyed girl swung herself into RWBY. Crescent Rose clattered to the ground while its owner was sent skipping. Struggling to get to her feet, RWBY glared defiantly at the approaching forms of Roman and his sidekick. "Why? Why are you doing this? Without these ships the Grim and White Fan will overrun Vale." Roman shook his head in faux disappointment. "That's the point, Red!" RWBY ducked under a swing from the ginger-haired crime boss and made for Crescent Rose. Her rose-petal sprint was halted by Neo coming at her with a harsh kick to the cheek. Flowing with the momentum of her attack, the pint-sized teen cartwheeled over the dazed RWBY, catching the cloaked captain with a kick to the jaw that lifted her several feet into the air. Stunned and in pain, RWBY was left wide open to a point-blank shot from Torchwick's cane. Rolling over and clutching her side that was currently screaming in pain, RWBY glared at the two criminals. "But why? What do you get out of it?" Again Roman shook his head in a manner none too dissimilar from a parent scolding a child. "You're asking the wrong questions, Red. It's not what I have to gain, it's that I can't afford to lose." Despite the pain she was in and the severity of the situation, the crime boss words caught RWBY off guard and left her confused. As far as she knew, Roman Torchwick seemed like a pretty straightforward criminal. For as many times as she had encountered him, he always gave off the vibe of someone who was in it for himself, a greedy man who was simply looking to get himself wealthy off of misdeeds. What did he have to lose that was so precious to him that he was willing to side with Cinder? Any further thoughts on the matter were quickly shelved after she saw said crime boss motion for Neo to take care of the still-down Weiss. The twisted grin accompanied by Neo's mismatched eyes sent a shiver down RWBY's spine. In a bid to help her down partner, the silver-eyed captain attempted to bum rush Neo from behind, exploding into a flurry of petals. Despite this, Roman was easily able to catch the young teen by lassoing her with the tether hidden in his cane. With a quick tug, the effeminate crime boss simultaneously pulled RWBY towards him while recalling the head of his weapon. Team RWBY's captain cried out in pain as the butt of Roman's cane was jabbed right into her back. A blow to the back of her knee sent her to floor. Using his foot, Torchwick turned RWBY over before grinding his cane into her cheek. Peering down at the helpless teen, Roman shook his head in faux disappointment. "You've got spirit, little red." As if to prove his point, RWBY grabbed his cane with both hands and tried to shove it off her face. She got a stomp to her ribs for her troubles. "But this is the real world. The real world is cold." Torchwick crouched down and gripped RWBY's face in his hands, forcing her to stare into his eyes. "The real world doesn't care about spirit, little red." RWBY spat at his face. Torchwick, in turn, sneered before slamming her face into the hard metal of the Elysian airship. Wiping the spit off his face, he then grabbed a handful of her red and black hair. "I may be a gambling man, but even I know there are some bets you just don't take." RWBY could barely hear what Torchwick was going on about, her head still pounding from the previous blow. As her vision cleared, all she could see was Neo with her needle-like blade poised high above a still-downed Weiss. Tears filled her eyes as she struggled with all her might to free herself. Despite her squirming, Torchwick managed to keep a firm grip on the teen. "Like it or not, the people that hired me are going to change the world. You can't stop them, I can't stop them, and you know how that old saying goes, if you can't beat Baku." Despite the roar of the winds, that one singular word was heard by every single person atop the Elysian ship. Having worked closely with a certain blonde on pranks, Neo knew exactly what followed that word, so she was slightly more prepared. Roman had no such luck. Under both Roman and Neo's feet, a glyph array spun to life, already glowing in shades of orange, red, and white. In the blink of an eye following that, two mighty explosions rocked the ship to its core. Adam mentally cursed as he narrowly avoided a heel drop that shattered the floor. Using blush, he then blocked a side swipe from Gamble Shroud. Using his strength to shove Blake off kilter, he attempted to go for a stab with Wilt only to have his blade clash against Ember Celica. The white-fanged leader growled in pain as he felt Gamble Shroud's smaller blade bite into his side. Lashing out on instinct, his blade met only air as the image of his former partner faded away. All too familiar black ribbons wrapped themselves around his arm, temporarily trapping him. Yang capitalized on this, acting quickly and lashing out with a savage right hook to the face that sent Adam flying into a pile of rubble. "Keep it up! It's going to take a lot more than that to keep him down," Blake called out, already unloading a salvo of shots from her weapon. Her busted blonde partner wanted to ask how she knew that, but decided that was a question for a later date. Cocking both of her shotgun gauntlets, Yang unleashed a firestorm of shells. "Shit!" The blonde cursed as she and her partner rolled to either side, dodging out of the way of a crescent energy beam. Rising to her feet, Yang was barely able to catch the sight of Adam smashing blush into Blake's abdomen, sending her to the floor gasping for air. The blonde growled as she leapt at the masked faunus. Adam dodged the initial strike, weaved around the follow-up kick, blocked a fist with Wilt, and then lashed out with blush. "Fuck!" Yang cursed as the crimson blade cut into her thigh. "I will be taking Blake back with me." Adam spoke for the first time in a while. Despite the pain in her thigh, Yang shook her head and grinned. "No, you're not, because I'm going to beat the shit out of you right here and now." Cocky words for a weak human who can barely stand. Glaring straight into the eye holes of Adam's mask, Yang cracked her knuckles. "Funny thing about that is, the more damage I take." Flames engulfed the blonde as her eyes turned a light shade of crimson. "The stronger I hit." With a war cry, Yang charged, her fist held back. "Yang! No!" Blake's cry came all too late. A flash of crimson was the last thing Yang saw before all she knew was pain. Adam calmly wiped the blood off his blade as he stared down at the crumpled form of the troublesome blonde. "Funny, I can do the same." The bull faunus took a step towards the unconscious teen, intending to finish her. However, a dozen hazy shades of Blake suddenly appeared in front of him, blocking his path. "What?" The masked Fang member cried out, never having seen his former partner be able to produce so many clones of herself, even in such poor quality. With a swipe of Wilt, he quickly dismissed the illusions. A growl escaped his lips as he caught sight of a retreating Blake carrying Yang. "You will be mine again, I promise you that, my love." "Pirat-chan!" Naruto called out, leaping from a nearby rooftop as he caught sight of a familiar head of crimson locks. "Naruto!" the redhead answered back, throwing herself into his waiting arms. The couple's moment of comfort was brief though, both knowing there were far more important things going on. "Is Professor Ashbin alright?" Pira bit her lip. "I'm not sure. This is the first time I've ever seen him fight, but he was able to easily hold back one of Cinder's attacks. He told me to find you, General Ironwood, and the others though." Closing his eyes, Naruto let his other senses take over. Much to his shock, he could feel two massive sources of energy clashing right beneath their feet. One was clearly Cinder's, as it was heavily made up of natural energy, the telltale sign that she had gathered the rest of the Fall Maiden's powers. By process of elimination, that meant that the other energy source was Ashbin. Just as he had suspected as well, the headmaster of Beacon was unleashing huge amounts of some type of power. Whatever it was, Naruto wasn't sure, as it contained trace amounts of both natural energy, as well as what felt like a bastardized version of chakra. Yet another thing he would have to ask the enigmatic headmaster after this was all over. Any plans to ask those questions were quickly erased though, as he felt Ashbin's power take a sharp and sudden dive. The sound of Cinder ascending to the top of the tower could only mean one thing, a conclusion both he and Pira seemed to share if their grim look was anything to go by. "I need you to go and do as Professor Ashbin said, find Glinda, Ironwood, and Crow. I'll take care of Cinder in the meantime." Pira clenched her fists, wishing that she could argue against her boyfriend, that she could follow him into this battle. But she knew that she couldn't. Ashbin's last words to her rang in her head. "You'll only get in the way." It was a bitter pill to swallow. This all felt far too similar to what her life had been like during her days at Sanctum. However, there was now some sense of horrible irony, seeing as she was now the weak one looking up to people who stood head and shoulders above her. She knew Naruto was far and away her superior in terms of combat, despite any of his words to say otherwise. Sure, she was able to push him further than most people, but even then, he was always holding back. Not because he worried that he would hurt her, she'd earned enough bruises from him to say otherwise, but because he was on an entirely different plane than her. The class of warrior that Naruto sat among were the stuff of legends, the monstrous entities that could shift entire battles to their favor. She'd seen it firsthand several times. With a single Raisin Shuriken, her boyfriend could level whole plains. That was also the type of combatant he would be going up against. Cinder was no thug or garden variety enemy. Even before she had gained the rest of the maiden's powers, the amber-eyed woman had handily beaten her without using her semblance or aura. Recalling the searing inferno Cinder had casually created to try and erase her, Pira shuddered. Staring into the sapphires of her significant other, Pira swore to herself then and there that she would get there someday. One day, she'd be able to confidently stride into a battle like this with him. Until then, she was going to do all she could to support him. Kick her ass. Following that up with a quick yet scorching kiss, Pira left Naruto temporarily dumbfounded. Regaining his senses, the blonde nodded to his partner and girlfriend before launching himself up to the side of the CCT tower. Using chakra, he began to scale the building with practiced ease. Pira spared one last glance at the tower before dashing off to do what she needed to. "It seems the boy is capable of unleashing Kurama and a great deal of his strength, something I was not expecting." Cinder gazed out at the sight of the Biju currently tangling with the ancient Grim Wyvern, their battle having turned the remnants of what had once been Mountain Glen into nothing but flat lands. "You mean this isn't the Kyuubi's full power?" Her mistress' laugh caused her to turn and look at the jellyfish-like Grim that floated at her side. "Foolish child, if the boy had allowed Kurama to truly unleash himself, half of Sanus would have already been nothing but ash. No, as he is now, it seems the child is either only capable of or okay with letting Kurama use up to 5 tails of power." Looking back out at the horizon, Cinder fought hard to repress a shudder of fear. A gasp escaped her though as the fearsome chakra beast let loose a hellish stream of blistering flames, literally lighting up the night like a miniature sun. Before the newly minted maiden could question if the Grim Wyvern had any chance of matching the Biju, her mistress spoke. "The boy approaches. Prepare yourself and do not underestimate him. It will cost you your life. Remember our plan and the relic will be ours." Without a word more, the seer floated away, disappearing into the shadows of Ashbin's office. "Raisin Gan!" Cinder rolled to the side, swinging her arm out to summon up a wall of flames. The fires were all but eaten up by the drilling nature of the ball of chakra, but the hastily thrown-up defense served its purpose as Naruto narrowly missed his target, instead boring into the marble of the floor. Rising to his feet, the whiskered blonde casually backhanded an obsidian arrow that had been aimed for his head. The next instant he vanished from normal sight. The next thing Cinder saw was a flash of fox-like, honey-colored eyes glaring at her. Then there was pain. Naruto was not content to let the raven-haired maiden gain back any sort of footing. Speeding through a set of seals, the blonde calmly intoned, "Futon, Furyuden no Jutsu, Wind Release, Wind Dragon Bullet." A vacuum of wind condensed around the blonde, eventually forming into the shape of an opaque, serpentine dragon poised to strike. Letting out a dry, harsh roar, the beast surged forward. The woman cried out in pain as the jutsu slammed into her with all the force of a train. Again, Naruto was quick to not let up, already charging in with a Rasengan held in each hand. Thankful that her aura had managed to dampen the power of the jutsu, Cinder rolled to the side, the wall behind her being completely destroyed as the first Rasengan exploded. The newly minted Fall Maiden then swiped a glowing hand across the floor. Turning on a dime, Naruto used the remaining Rasengan to power through the wall of Cinder's glass needles. The brief second that took was all the maiden needed to conjure her signature bow, 3 arrows already knocked. Without needing to use any hand seals or even needing to verbalize the technique, the blonde shinobi pulled off a kawarimi, a chunk of what had once been the wall taking the arrows for him. Steel clashed against glass as Hai no Ishi collided against Cinder's twin obsidian blades. The sword lock was brief, Naruto having created a shadow clone that was now rushing towards Cinder with a Rasengan in hand. Although she saw the clone, the raven-haired woman had no other outward reaction to its presence. Instead, she stared her opponent down as her body was wreathed in flames. Naruto cursed as the flames then exploded outwards, threatening to consume him. Then again, having had an Uchiha as a teammate/rival meant he was no stranger to fire-based attacks. Thinking quickly, Naruto used the replacement jutsu yet again, sacrificing his clone to give him enough distance to escape Cinder's flames. Deciding to take a page out of both his girlfriend and Asuma Sarutobi's book, Naruto coated both halves of Hai no Ishi in a hefty amount of wind nature chakra. The blade portion was thrown like a javelin while the staff/sheath was launched by a chakra-powered kick. Naruto didn't end it there, creating another clone. Together, the pair of blondes sped through a chain of hand seals. Katon, Karyo Enden, Fire Release, Dragon Flame Bomb. Futon, Furyuden no Jutsu, Wind Release, Wind Dragon Bullet. Twin roars were heard, each resonating in a different key and timbre, causing an ear-aching dissonance. However, it was as one that the two jutsu moved forward, coiling around each other, and eventually melding into one monstrous behemoth. The ensuing explosion rocked the tower and engulfed the entire office in a hellish pyre. For a brief moment afterwards, nothing moved, only the crackle of the remaining fires filling the void. Just as quickly as it had come, the silence was broken. Whatever flames remained from Naruto's combined attack were suddenly sucked into a single spot. Cinder emerged from a pile of rubble holding a highly compressed ball of fire. Using her control over the element, she split it in two. Holding a miniature sun in each hand, the raven-haired maiden took a page from her opponent's book and charged forward. Naruto sidestepped the initial swipe, then used the backside of his hand to smack Cinder in the wrist. Ducking under the follow-up, the blonde went for an uppercut. To the maiden's surprise, despite dodging the actual attack, she felt something slam into the underside of her chin with enough power to lift her into the air. Grabbing Cinder's leg, Naruto then spun and sent the woman careening into a wall. Moving in a burst of speed, he collected both pieces of his weapon. The durability of Hai no Ishi's blade was put to the test though, as Naruto used it to cut through the 2 concentrated orbs of fire Cinder had launched at him. Having channeled a hefty amount of chakra into it, the Chikuto was able to easily cleave through them with no damage to itself. Naruto grimaced as several high-pitched whistles suddenly assaulted his ears. That brief moment cost him as numerous black and orange voids spun into existence all around him. Sure dash. Beacon Tower was yet again victim to another massive explosion, gouts of flames pouring out its long-destroyed windows. Panting, Naruto held back the urge to scream in pain as he could feel his natural healing ability try to heal the now heavily burned flesh on his right arm and leg. Knowing he couldn't afford to stay down for long, the blonde called upon his partner's chakra, coating him in its shroud. His Uzumaki vitality powered by Kurama's chakra accelerated the healing process, the old blackened flesh literally flaking away to reveal perfectly unmarred skin. Taking a moment longer, the blonde decided to take it a step further, calling forth even more of the Kyuubi's chakra. The once hazy shroud began to grow far more vibrant as several chakra tails sprouted from his backside. Feeling the natural energy of his sage mode and Kurama's chakra fighting against each other, and his own chakra, it took some effort to perfectly balance out the three energies inside of him. However, he was well rewarded for that effort. Naruto stood to his feet as his four-tailed Biju cloak went from a malicious reddish color to a much more serene and controlled golden hue. Whereas before the four-tailed cloak of chakra had literally burned his flesh away and boiled his blood, it now coiled around him protectively, gently swaying like golden flames. Opening his eyes, sharp ambers took in the remains of Ajban's office with a preternatural level of calm. Flexing his hand, Naruto could feel the thrum of untold amounts of power as nature energy, and Kurama's chakra raced through him alongside his own chakra. The moment of all was ruined as a column of flames consumed him. However, it was Cinder who felt the icy hands of fear grip her as Naruto simply walked out of the column, completely unscathed, looking only mildly irritated. Holding both hands out, Naruto easily created a Raisin Shuriken in each. Wide-eyed and knowing exactly what the jutsu was capable of, Cinder flung herself to the side, just barely avoiding the first one's blades. Rolling, the Fall Maiden then pushed herself forward with a burst of flames to avoid the second. The twin jutsu easily tore through the walls of Ajban's office before Naruto allowed them to detonate miles away. While she had escaped the S-class jutsu, Cinder was not able to avoid Naruto himself. Literally disappearing in a flash of raw speed, the sage appeared right in front of the Fall Maiden. A gasp was all that Cinder was able to get out before Naruto grabbed her face and plowed her straight into the ground. Far from done, one of his cloak's tails grabbed the raven-haired woman by her leg before sending her skipping along the ground. Struggling to her feet, Cinder attempted to shroud herself in her own cloak of flames to match her opponent's, and possibly provide her with some level of defense. Naruto's fist slamming into her sternum violently robbed her of both the idea and the air in her lungs. The following backhand thundered into her ribcage with so much power that Cinder could feel her aura shield literally shatter before she was once more sent careening into a pile of rubble. Her body screaming in pure agony, the Fall Maiden could do nothing as Naruto coiled one of his chakra tails around her throat and lifted her into the air. "Why?" Naruto narrowed his eyes at the struggling maiden. "Because I swore to myself that I would never let what happened to Konoha happen again. There's more going on here. You're defending the men who would sacrifice the people they protect for their own gain and benefit." Naruto shook his head. "I told you before, I'm not siding with anyone. My end goal is a world where true peace through understanding one another is achieved, a world that my father, my godfather, and cousin gave their lives for. She was right about you, so naive." That was the only warning Naruto got. Cinder superheated her hands, allowing her to burn through the chakra tail that was holding her up. The amber-eyed maiden quickly reached into her pouch and pulled on a pristine white glove that had an intricate sealing formula written on its palm. Moving in closer to grab Cinder again, Naruto realized too late that was exactly what she wanted. "Guys! What's going on?" Ruby called out as she and Weiss raced to meet up with their friends. Both looked worse for wear, their clothes heavily singed while patches of soot covered their faces and hands. However, the sight they came upon made them realize just how lucky they had gotten. "No!" Blake sobbed as she looked between a clearly shaken-up Ruby and an unconscious Yang. "Ruby! This is all my fault. I didn't mean for this to happen. I wasn't strong enough, and Yang will never be the same because of me." Hanging her head, the raven-haired fauness felt hot tears cut trails through her bloodied and dirty face, mentally trying to prepare herself to hear both her captain and Weiss scream at her, to hear them say that they hated her and never wanted to see her again. Instead, she felt a pair of arms encircle her. Terrified of what she might lose and shaken up by all that had happened, Blake instantly latched onto the younger teen and let the tears continue to flow. Together they cried, one for her sister and the other for a friend she hoped and prayed she wouldn't lose after tonight. Weiss knew that Ruby was the best and only person who could help Blake right now, and so decided to check up on the rest of their friends. The Schneeres frowned as she did a head count, noting that not everybody was with them. Seeing Nora and Ren supporting each other, both heavily bandaged in places, the snow-haired teen asked, "Where are Naruto and Pira?" Ren frowned and shook his head. "We don't know. We haven't seen them since we landed and they ran off to meet with Professor Ajban." Nora hissed in pain, her very tender ribs protesting against her attempts to stand. "There's no way we're leaving without them," Ren cursed under his breath. The unlikely duo of an Elysian paladin and Ursa Major had been too much for the childhood friends. Had it not been for Velvet's timely arrival along with help from her team and the guise of Team Jest, he and Nora may not have made it. Now here they were, too hurt to go find and help their missing friends. The Schnee heiress sighed and shook her head, mumbling to herself. That idiot better be okay. Straightening her posture and grabbing Murdenaster, Weiss steeled herself before nodding to the pair. I'll go and find them. Knowing that dolt, he's probably in the thick of it and Pyrrha will more than likely be there supporting him. I'm coming too. Ruby chimed in, crescent rose resting across her shoulder. Sharing a look, the two turned to leave. Ruby paused though, turning to look at a still sobbing Blake who was clutching onto Yang's remaining hand like a lifeline. Kneeling down, she whispered to her teammate, Take care of my sister for me. And just like that she was off with Weiss. No, 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 no! It was the only thing Pyrrha could even think as she sprinted back towards the tower, not even sparing a glance at the grim or fleeing White Fang members. She had just about made it to Vale proper and had even caught a glimpse of Professor Goodwitch helping to set up a safe zone, but the sudden disappearance of Kurama from the battlefield stopped her dead. The look of surprise and concern on the Biju's face told Pyrrha all she needed to know. Ice filled her veins. Without even realizing it, her body had gone on autopilot and sent her racing back towards the tower, only one person on her mind. Seeing the grim wyvern, heavily wounded and bleeding from its bout with Kurama, perched at the tower's top sent a chill of fear down Pyrrha's spine. The monstrosity had been terrifying miles outside of Vale. This close to it, it was almost hard to breathe, her heart threatening to beat out of her chest from sheer terror alone. While she didn't have the sensory awareness her boyfriend had, the red-haired teen could still feel the almost miasmic and oppressive aura the ancient creature gave off. Even still, the thought of Naruto in danger was enough for her to shake off the fear. Moving Milo and Akko into her hands, Pyrrha charged forward. Boarding the elevator, or what remained of it, the redhead closed her eyes, mentally loosening the restrictions she usually put on her semblance, knowing she was going to have to use every power at her disposal to even stand a chance. All at once, the area around her began to hum and rattle as a murky gray suffused the walls around the emerald-eyed teen. Pyrrha clenched her fists. The elevator exploded upwards. How? How can you still fight? Cinder rasped out, running on fumes at this point. She had been winded after her fight with Ojban, the old professor having proven very well why her mistress was wary of him. Fighting Naruto had pushed her far past being just tired, but she had gotten the seal off and shut off his link to the chakra beast within him, while also throwing his whole chakra pathways into a flurry. Even still though, the whiskered teen kept on going. Sure, he could no longer dish out jutsu or even amplify his striking power with his chakra, but it was clear that Naruto had trained himself to not rely solely on either of those things. Tired? No, Cinder was not just tired. Hell, not even exhaustion could properly sum up what she felt right now. Naruto simply laughed as he weaved through another shower of crystal needles. This isn't the first time I've had to fight with my chakra all screwed up, and it probably won't be the last. Using the staff/sheath of Hi-No Ishi, the blonde batted aside an arrow and sliced through the one that followed. Ducking low to avoid the swath of flames that Cinder launched out of her hands, the handicapped Jinchuriki caught the exhausted maiden with a swing to the ribs from his weapon's ebony staff. Cinder returned the favor in kind, blasting the blonde with a beam of concentrated flames. Naruto grunted as he was slammed into one of the last remaining walls of Ojban's office. Catching movement out of the corner of his eye, Naruto cursed as he ducked low, avoiding a gout of noxious green flames. 2 on 1? That's just not fair! Naruto complained even as he weaved around another of Cinder's arrows. The ding of the elevator, the door of which having somehow survived, caught the attention of everyone, even the grim wyvern. A second passed. The three combatants stared at the doors, waiting. They didn't have to wait long. A familiar red and gold javelin flew out of the doors. Cinder rolled to the side and avoided the weapon. The grim wyvern perched behind her was not so lucky. A hideous cry of pain echoed as the javelin pierced into its snout. Just as quickly as it had come though, the weapon was called back to its master, a murky gray aura yanking it from the wyvern even as the beast took flight once more. Cinder frowned as she stared down the couple. While Naruto was severely weakened thanks to her mistress Seal, he had proven himself to be a formidable opponent still. Pyrrha Nikos, while not as powerful as her boyfriend, was still an extremely competent warrior in her own right, and would prove to be an annoyance. Had this been an hour or so ago, before she fought Ashbin and before she had thought it smart to tangle with Naruto, Cinder knew she could have taken the two with some effort on her part. In her current state of fatigue, her aura shield now gone, Cinder had no illusions of where she stood. Squashing down that feeling, the raven-haired maiden hoped the grim wyvern her mistress had summoned would prove itself useful despite the wounds it bore from its battle with the Kyuubi. Avoiding a hail of glass needles, Naruto mentally thanked Pira for her timely appearance. While he would be far happier knowing she was safer away from here, he also couldn't discredit her for being here either. Hell, had he been in her position, he would have done the same thing, consequences be damned. The blonde grimaced as Cinder blasted him with another wave of flames. However, this left her open to an assault from Pira. Seeing his girlfriend slam into their raven-haired opponent's side with a kuo, Naruto was reminded of why he was grateful for her being here though. Sure, he had the stamina to continue duking it out with the newly minted Fall Maiden, but with Kurama's seal tightened yet again and his chakra pathways thrown into a dizzying mess by whatever seal Cinder had used, his entire jutsu arsenal was just outside of his grasp. Hell, his chakra was so messed up he couldn't even summon a shadow clone, something not even Orochimaru's Gojyo Fuin, 5-element seal, had stopped him from using back during the Chunin exams. All he had to rely on now was his own strength, skill with high no ishi, and good old-fashioned grit. Ducking under a swathe of flames, Naruto scored a decisive kick to Cinder's solar plexus. Pivoting on his foot, he spun back around and delivered a solid backhand to her spine that sent her right towards a waiting Pira. Rushing forward, Naruto had to admit, it had been his own grit and determination that had gotten him through countless other battles in the past. What was one more? Cinder growled as she used a blast of flames to direct her away from the business end of Pira's javelin. Swinging her body low, she avoided the open palm thrust from Naruto that followed. Grabbing him by the same wrist to temporarily hold him, Cinder placed her open palm flush against his right side. An explosion sent him flying. Coating her hands in a layer of flames, the maiden grabbed Milo by the shaft. Pulling a surprised Pira in by her own weapon, Cinder gave the redhead the same treatment she had given to the Jinchuriki. Panting, Cinder took a moment to gather the necessary energy for her next attack. Naruto and Pira weren't going to let that happen though, both rising to their feet and racing towards the immobile woman, weapons raised. Cinder roared as she let loose the energy she had built up. With her own body acting as a focal point, a literal dome of searing flames exploded outwards. The two members of Team NNPR could only brace themselves. "What was that?" RWBY called out even as Crescent Rose bisected a hapless creep. Wise shook her head in exasperation as Beacon Tower was literally engulfed in flames. "Probably where that idiot blonde and Pira are." Any further quips were quickly put on hold though as the two teens watched the behemoth Grim Wyvern ram full force into the tower, completely destroying the entire top half of the structure. "That can't be good," RWBY muttered. "You don't say!" Shaking herself out of the brief reverie, the younger of the two steeled herself. "We've got to hurry!" "Pira!" Naruto called out, tossing aside the chunk of concrete that had fallen on him. Forcing himself to his feet, the blonde could feel his entire body light up in excruciating pain, causing him to fall to his knees in agony. Taking a deep breath, the blonde took stock of his injuries. Any attempts at moving his left hand resulted only in a bit more than just discomfort. Looking down at the limb, it was easy to see why. "Pretty sure my arm's not supposed to look like that." Feeling a constant throb from his right arm, the whiskered teen didn't even bother to look at it, already knowing why. Trying to block a literal wall of flames with just my right hand was probably not my brightest moment. Peering around him with only one eye and feeling a warm, coppery liquid drip past his lips was enough to let him know that he was also steadily bleeding from a wound on his head somewhere. Despite the less than stellar condition he found himself in, the blonde growled as he once more pushed himself to his feet. "All in all, not the worst I've ever had." "Naruto!" Looking to his left, a relieved yet strained smile crossed his face as he spotted Pira clambering out from underneath her own pile of rubble, looking pretty banged up. She was however nowhere near as egregiously injured as he was, no doubt thanks to her aura shield. The redhead was likewise just as thankful to see her boyfriend still alive. Seeing a chunk of his normally bright mane of hair dyed a ruddy crimson from his own blood was not what she wanted to ever see. To her growing horror, that was not the worst of his injuries. Both of his arms simply hung at his sides, looking completely mangled and lifeless. With his jacket and shirt completely burned away, she could see ugly black and purple bruises already forming on his body. Whatever part of him hadn't been bruised by the tower literally falling on them was instead charred a horrendous black from Cinder's flames. Seeing tears bubbling on his girlfriend's face, Naruto tried to put on a brave face for her. "Hey! It's gonna be fine. I've had worse than this." Shaking her head, Pyrrha undid the clasp on the stretch of cloth she kept tied around her waist. Rolling it up, she used the soft fabric to clean her partner's face, allowing him to open both of his eyes. In response, he gave her a toothy grin. The bright smile didn't last long as another flash of pain shot through him. Gritting his teeth so as to not scream, the blonde stared into the worried eyes of his girlfriend. "Why aren't you healing like you normally do? Cinder used some seal to screw up my chakra and cut off my link to Kurama. I hate to do this, but I'm gonna need you to distract her while I try and remove it." Without even tearing her gaze away, Pyrrha used her semblance to call Milo and Akko to her. "I'll try and buy you as much time as you need. Please be careful." The two shared a chaste kiss before Naruto settled himself into a meditative position. "I've bested you once before, foolish girl," Cinder snarled, batting aside a swing from Milo. Pyrrha frowned at the reminder of their spar all those months ago. Taking a quick scan of the area around them, the redhead smirked. "That was when I wasn't using my semblance." Cinder's eyes widened as she heard movement from behind her. Ducking, the maiden just barely avoided being slammed into by one of the large gears that had made up Ashbin's office. Swinging an arm out, Cinder used a gout of flames to melt the following piece of metal into sludge as it neared her. Rising to her feet, the maiden raced towards Pyrrha, all the while dodging or melting any obstacles the redhead summoned up. Foregoing her tactic of attempting to pelt Cinder, Pyrrha readied her weapons and charged to meet her opponent. The red and gold of Milo clashed against the deep ebony of Cinder's obsidian blades. Akko just as easily stopped a strike from the second of the twin weapons. Using her superior strength and leverage, Pyrrha pushed forward and shoved Cinder stumbling back. Spinning on her foot, the redhead sent Akko spinning straight for the maiden. Although Cinder was able to bat aside the shield and regain some of her balance, Pyrrha did not let up on the assault, and was already right in front of the raven-haired woman with Milo poised to strike. Knowing she had no aura shield to defend herself from the multipurpose weapon, Cinder instead coated her hands in flames and grabbed the weapon with both her hands. With a great heave of effort, the raven-haired maiden pivoted and sent her opponent flying. Riding herself midair, Pyrrha launched Milo with all the pinpoint accuracy she had trained for. Using the same tactic she had with the shield, Cinder deflected the javelin. A cocky smirk crinkled Cinder's face as she created her signature bow and arrows, annealing Pyrrha in her sights. That cocky smirk was wiped off her face as a massive girder slammed into her. Forehead dripping in sweat, Pyrrha's entire body was covered in the murky gray aura of her semblance, as she literally bent a girder around Cinder. Panting, the redhead called her weapons back to her with nary a thought. "Naruto, please hurry. I don't know how much longer I can do this." As if hearing his partner's thoughts, Naruto grunted as he finished unlocking the first portion of whatever seal Cinder had used on him. Using his control over his own mindscape, the blonde had summoned up a geyser of water that raised him up to the middle section of the massive gate that had housed Kurama for the better part of his life. While previously the massive iron bars had been held shut by the tiny seal that represented the 8 trigram seal his father had used, thanks to his own tweaks to it, the gate had been opened partially allowing Kurama the freedom of coming and going as he pleased. Sure, the Biju could only use as much power as Naruto allowed him, but being able to move his conscious mind to a corporeal body created from his own chakra had been a much-needed breath of fresh air for the Kitsune-themed chakra monster. However, thanks to acquiring Konoha's scroll of seals and his growing bond with Kurama, Naruto had been able to almost entirely wrench the gates open, giving the pair that much more access to the Kyuubi's vast powers. Whatever seal Cinder had used on him had completely erased all that progress through the gates of the Hak no Fuin Shiki, replaced by 2 massive iron doors, numerous locks and lengths of chain covering them. As if the numerous locks weren't enough, the chains themselves were literally crawling with 2 different types of grim. While Naruto recognized the ghoulish form of several geists haunting the chains, something he was completely not okay with, he had never seen the other, much smaller grim so much as mentioned in his research on the creatures. The insect-like grim was so small that Naruto had almost completely missed seeing them when mixed in with the geist, chains, and overall imposing structure that was his seal. However, he'd been forced to notice them when they attacked alongside the geist, shooting a tar-like substance from their mandibles. While the substance in and of itself posed only as a minor irritation for the shinobi, it was what the insect Grim was able to do with it that was the real issue. Through some unknown, to Naruto, ability, the tiny pests were able to siphon off his chakra through the tar-like substance and filter it elsewhere, in this case being its fellow Grim, or the very chains it crawled on. Obviously this was not a good thing at all, what with Naruto's Uzumaki heritage gifting him with incredibly potent and dense chakra. So, not only did he now have to contend with the mental task of deciphering whatever seal Cinder had used, but also combat the various Grim trying to stop him from doing the aforementioned task. Luckily, he was a master at being able to split himself between multiple tasks, one with no parallel if he was being boastfully honest. Kage Bunshin is the best jutsu ever made, Naruto muttered to himself with a grin. That grin widened as he managed to successfully break another lock open. Umaki and their damn seals! When I get out of here I swear I'm going to destroy any and all seals I come across. Naruto's sweat dropped as Kurama's voice boomed throughout the halls of his mindscape as the doors of his seal were cracked open. Good to see you're as much of an angry asshole as ever, you dumb furball. Gaki! I swear to Kami if you don't open these damn doors right now and let me use that raven-haired wench as a toothpick for the rest of my life, I will make sure you never have a headache-free minute ever again. Would you shut your damn mouth? I'm already working on it and your screaming isn't exactly helpful. Helpful? You want helpful? I'll give you helpful. Curious, Naruto leaned over to peer into the slight crack that had opened between the gates. Seeing a familiar ominous purple glow, the Jinchuriki's eyes comically widened before he flung himself as far to the side as was possible. As the light of the Baijudama died down, Naruto surveyed the iron walls only to see that any and all of the Grim that had been polluting his seal had been completely erased. Huh, that actually was helpful. Good, now get me the hell out of here, you useless monkey. Naruto blew a raspberry at the single crimson eye glaring at him from the crack in the seal even as he and his clones got to work on the other locks. Grumbles of ungrateful foxes followed soon after. However, the mood was completely soured as Kurama suddenly spoke in a much more urgent voice. Shit! Gaki, you need to get out of here right now. Pira needs you more than I do. Naruto didn't even offer a verbal response before ejecting himself from his own mindscape. A cry of pain echoed across the night as Pira was thrown into yet another pile of rubble. While she had initially been able to keep pace with the weakened and very tired Cinder, any sort of advantage she may have had was reduced to literal ash as the Grim Wyvern made itself known once more, apparently having recuperated somewhat. Between dodging the creature's massive talons and gouts of noxious green flames as well as Cinder's own attacks, Pira had been fighting a losing battle. Even still, she did all she could, pushing her semblance to new heights as she used the rubble of Ashbin's office to both attack and defend. The redhead formed huge constructs of metal that just barely managed to weather the heat of the Grim Wyvern's acidic flames. Rebar was fashioned into cheap Milo copies and used as projectiles against the monstrous nightmare. Cinder was forced to contend with Milo and Akko, Pira showing just how deadly the two weapons could be when used in tandem with her semblance. Despite her best efforts though, the redhead was only human and had her limits. Grunting in pain as Cinder used her signature explosions to destroy Pira's aura shield, the emerald-eyed teen could safely say she had reached those limits. Weary and eager to finally get rid of a rather pesky thorn, Cinder strode up to the redhead and grabbed her by the ponytail, forcing her to look straight into her eyes. I must admit, I'm somewhat jealous of you, Ms. Nikos. Hailed as an invincible fighter, adored by many for your beauty, a near-spotless and flawless school record, gifted with a semblance of immense power and potential, and in a relationship with a man every bit as powerful and gifted as you are, if not more so. An ugly sneer crossed Cinder's face as she pulled Pira in even closer. In other words, a person with everything I never had. Throwing the redhead to the floor, Cinder conjured up her ebony bow as she slammed her foot into Pira's abdomen. Pira screamed in pain as an arrow was launched straight into her thigh. Do you believe in destiny, Nikos? Pushing herself even further, Pira used her semblance to direct Milo at Cinder's exposed back. Sensing the danger quickly flying towards her, the raven-haired maiden moved to the side and avoided being run through by a vengeful javelin. Pira used this opportunity to struggle to her feet. Directing a heated glare at her opponent, the redhead steadied herself as best she could what with her injured thigh. A few years ago I may have said yes, but after meeting a certain someone, I've learned that we are the ones who ultimately decide our own fate. Cinder only sneered. How naive. That was the only warning Pira got. The next instant, Cinder was flying straight at her, holding what could only be described as a cheap mock-up of a raisin gun made of flames. Knowing she was in no state to dodge the attack, the redhead threw up what defenses she could muster, and with as low as she was on energy, those defenses were her own 2 weapons. A coal was tossed in its usual deadly buzzsaw fashion. Having been thoroughly annoyed by the redhead and her weapons, Cinder used her imitation raisin gun to literally burn straight through the bronze shield, cleaving it in twain. While saddened by the loss of part of her beloved weapon set, Pyrrha focused on the task at hand. With a bit of quick and painful footwork, the redhead managed to just barely twirl out of the way of Cinder's initial strike. Flowing with her sloppy spin, Pyrrha made to attack her opponent's exposed back with Milo. Despite being as tired and exhausted as she was, Cinder was still able to easily redirect herself and catch the weapon in her hand. With a strong grip and a little heat, the blade met the same fate as its brother. Weaponless, injured, drained, and in such close proximity, Pyrrha could do nothing but watch as the broiling orb of raw heat came ever closer to her chest. Pyrrha accepted what was to come next. It was an inevitability she had known could come at any time as a huntress, but one she had sincerely hoped to not meet until she was wrinkled and gray. Even still, a smile crossed her face. She had met so many wonderful people she was more than happy to call her friends, and in the case of her teammates, some she dared to call her family. Hell, she had even managed to snag herself a boy, no, a man, who had brought a vibrancy into her life like no other, a man who saw her and loved her for everything she was. Feelings she more than reciprocated. She had hoped to see what the future may have held for them, but it seemed her visions of blonde-haired kids with emerald green eyes were to remain only as daydreams of a girl smitten. Naruto. I love you. Pyrrha Nikos was not happy about her approaching death, but she accepted it all the same. Don't you fucking touch her! Naruto! Pyrrha! 4 sets of eyes widened. From her new position on the floor, Pyrrha found herself looking up at a scene that would forever haunt her. A scream full of a horrid, soul-wrenching sadness pierced the night. In the blink of an eye, Pyrrha's world shattered into so many pieces and became so disjointed that she was completely unsure if the scream had come from her or not. Despite the tears burning her eyes and the horrible shaking that she just couldn't stop, the redhead managed to scramble on her hands and knees as Cinder removed her hand from the hole that she had burned into Naruto's chest cavity. Completely ignoring the seemingly shocked maiden, Pyrrha cradled his head in her lap, fingers shaking as she stroked his dirted mane. Naruto? Naruto? Please answer me! Bleary sapphires cracked open. Can't a guy get some rest around here? A small spark of hope filled Pyrrha's heart as a ghost of a foxy grin crinkled whiskered cheeks. I'm sorry, but you'll have plenty of time to rest after Kurama heals you, right? The grim look that crossed her partner's face caused a fresh cascade of tears to fall from emerald eyes. Ignoring the gaping fist-sized hole in her boyfriend's chest and the multitude of previous wounds that had yet to heal, Pyrrha cupped his whiskered cheeks. Kurama, I know you can hear me. You're already working on healing Naruto, right? He'll be back on his feet in no time, right? From within a quickly fading seal, the great Kyuubi no Kitsune could do nothing but decry the gods who had put his host on this cruel path. Although he heard the redhead loud and clear, there was no way he could respond. Even if that was possible, he would have still held his tongue, unwilling to further destroy the poor girl by telling her that no, Naruto would not be getting up from this one. To tell one of the few humans he could stand that, due to whatever seal Cinder had placed on Naruto, he was unable to use his chakra to supercharge the blonde's Uzumaki healing factor. In fact, as it stood, that same healing factor and what chakra he could get through were the only things prolonging the inevitable. Angry crimson orbs snapped open as the Kyuubi no Kitsune rose to his feet and began to exert the full force of his chakra. From behind the twin steel doors that kept him from helping his partner, Kurama raged, unwilling to lay down and let his host die, Kami and the Shinigami be damned. He and Naruto had not come this far for it to end like this. He refused to let it all end here. Perhaps that infamous Uzumaki stubbornness had rubbed off on the Biju. Despite the best efforts of his Biju partner, Naruto could feel the cold fingers of the Shinigami already grasping at him. Sorry, I couldn't undo the seal fast enough. That was the last thing Pyrrha could handle, sending the redhead into hysterics, as she engulfed Naruto in her arms. Standing over them, Cinder looked at her own hand, the very hand that she had just ripped from the blonde teen's chest. Murder and death were nothing new for the maiden. The death of her father had left her to wallow in a horrid life of servitude, but it has been an act of murder that awakened her semblance. Now, years later, it was through the death and murder of another that she gained the powers of the Fall Maiden. And yet, watching as once vibrant electric blue eyes began to dull, Cinder couldn't shake the feeling of wrongness that now hung over her. Shaking her head, the raven-haired maiden spared one last glance at the couple before looking up at the younger teen who had just arrived on the scene. Any and all of Cinder's thoughts were ground to a sudden halt as her gaze was met by a pair of hateful silver eyes. The look of pure loathing on the young woman's face was far removed from what many would agree to be Ruby's usually cheerful disposition. However, what caused a thrill of fear to shoot up Cinder's spine was the fact that the scythe-wielder's eyes were literally glowing, wisps of a milky white smoke swirling and coalescing around her eyes. "Silver eyes," Cinder whispered to herself in sheer frightened awe. The distant roar of the grim wyvern ripped the raven-haired woman from her reverie, alerting her to its quickly approaching form. Knowing that the behemoth was meant to finish tearing down the CCT relay, Cinder beat a hasty retreat. As Ruby unfurled Crescent rose and made to follow, Naruto calling her name shook her out of her fury-induced trance, any traces of her eyes glowing with power vanishing with a blink. Grimacing in pain and finding it especially hard to breathe thanks to the lack of a lung, Naruto knew he had little time to do what he had to. "Ruby, I need you to get Pyrrha and yourself out of here, now." The two young women were quite vocal in their protest of this, but Naruto wasn't hearing any of it. "That thing is coming to finish its job and destroy the rest of the tower, and I'll be damned if this place becomes a grave for all of us." Turning himself inward, the Jinchuriki addressed his partner for what would be the last time. "Got enough juice for one last one, Kurama?" There was a moment of silence before the chakra beast answered. "Just enough to get them clear of here. But not much farther, and it's going to hurt like a bitch." "It'll have to do. Thanks, Kurama. Anytime." Naruto. Using what strength he could muster, Naruto grabbed Hi-no Ishi and held it out for Ruby to take. The younger team captain choked on a sob as she tearfully took the weapon, knowing exactly what she was meant to do with it. "Ruby, promise me you'll watch over Pyrrha for me." Swallowing the lump in her throat, Ruby gave a firm nod of her head. "I promise." Turning his head, Naruto smiled as he looked up into a tearful pair of beautiful emeralds. "Pyrrha-chan, I'll always love you. I'm sorry." Fighting through a grimace and a howl of pain, Naruto forced what chakra he could from himself and Kurama through the seal Cinder had placed on him. In a poof of smoke, a much less injured copy of the blonde shinobi appeared. With a nod to its creator, the doppelganger moved to pick up Pyrrha. However, the redhead fought against the clone's grasp, reaching out and attempting to grab a hold on her partner. In her scramble to latch onto the blonde, she grabbed a hold of his headband and held tight. Using a little more strength, the clone managed to pull Pyrrha away, the redhead taking his headband with her. Nudging Ruby away, the group moved to the edge of the tower. With one last glance back and a soul-wrenching cry from Pyrrha, the three disappeared from sight as they leapt off the tower. Gazing up at the stars and the shattered moon above him, Naruto allowed a serene smile to cross his face. "So done in by someone shoving their hand through my chest. Probably some cosmic irony in there somewhere. Think Cinder is related to Sasuke or something?" Kurama let out a laugh at the morbid joke. "Raven hair, pale skin, some sort of power-hungry complex, and an affinity for fire? Might be onto something there, Gaki." The two began to laugh uproariously as images of Cinder wearing what they had fondly dubbed as Sasuke's purple asbow flitted through Naruto's mind. Admittedly, the raven-haired schemer pulled it off far better than the emo wonder ever had. However, imagining Sasuke wearing Cinder's signature maroon dress sent the Jinchuriki and Biju pair into hysterics. A screech in the distance alerted Naruto to his quickly approaching doom. Instead of fearing it, the blonde only grinned. "Ready to see what the great beyond has in store for us?" Despite the grim reality of the situation they were in, Kurama scoffed and shook his head. "No, but when am I ever ready with you?" Naruto chuckled at the truth of Kurama's words even as the grim wyvern plowed into the tower with explosive force. As the CCT relay tower began to collapse in on itself, the mortally wounded blonde spared one last glance at the shattered moon. Feeling himself sliding into the dark abyss below, a stream of tears began to trickle down his cheeks. "Sorry everyone, looks like I failed again." Pyrrha fought with all the strength she had left in her, raging against the pair of familiar arms that were carrying her away from Beacon Tower. Despite the familiarity of the arms, though, there was something innately wrong about the thing that was holding her. There was a certain warmth that Naruto's clones lacked, a certain brightness that was unique to their creator alone, a small detail that seemed even more noticeable in this moment. Any thoughts she had on the difference between Naruto and his clones were slammed to a full stop as the grim wyvern crashed through what remained of Beacon's namesake. The monstrous nightmare was far from done, though. Hovering above the remnants of the once mighty structure, the beast spewed out a gout of vile green flames. Pyrrha and RWBY could only stare in sheer horror as the veritable wave of sickly, noxious flames consumed almost the entirety of the surrounding area, lighting up the dark of the night with a pale, emerald glow. The stench of the conflagration was something neither of the teens had ever smelled, something they could only liken to the smell of rot and decay. But their horror-induced trance was broken as Pyrrha suddenly found herself on the cold, hard ground. Blinking away the brief confusion, ice filled Pyrrha's veins as realization set in. The shadow clone that had been holding her had dispersed, because its creator was no more. Naruto was no more. Naruto Uzumaki was dead. A wail of pure anguish left Pyrrha's lips as the cold reality of the situation set in. RWBY pulled up the hood of her cloak in an attempt to hide the cascade of tears, but she could do nothing to mask the shaking of her shoulders as sobs racked her body. The two remained rooted to their spots, each trying, and failing, to come to grips with everything that had happened tonight. In only a few hours, it seemed like the end of their world had come. Their school was all but demolished, their friends had all been injured egregiously. They had lost Penny, a life taken by Pyrrha's own hands. Professor Ojban had fallen to cinder. And now, here they were, watching from afar as Beacon Tower was consumed by an almost literal funeral pyre, a macabre memorial for the blonde Uzumaki who had brought a vibrancy to their lives. But it seemed the world was intent on continuing to run them into the very dirt. The horrendous, ear-aching roar of the grim wyvern tore Pyrrha and RWBY from their mourning. Wide-eyed and damn near exhaustion, the two could only watch as the nightmare-given physical form landed before them, the light of the burning beacon tower acting as an all-too-fitting backdrop. For a moment, the two only stared, paralyzed by the sheer physical weight of the beast's oppressive aura. Seeing the thing come closer to them, something in Pyrrha snapped. Enough! Enough is enough! The redhead shakily stood to her feet and glared defiantly at the behemoth before her. The murky gray of her semblance began to cover her body as raw anger and a deep loathing bubbled in her. Anger at the creature before her, anger at her own weakness, and most importantly, a deep-seated loathing for the woman who had orchestrated all of this. Her mind clouded by the blaze of fury that had consumed her, a single thought process began to race through the redhead's mind. This thing took Naruto from me. I want it gone, I want it erased, I want it destroyed. Feeling something within her bubble up and beg for an escape, Pyrrha splayed her hands out in front of her and simply pushed. She pushed against the boundaries of her broken and tired body, pushed against the beast before her, and pushed against the very world itself. Out from her hands came a hazy wave of an almost sludge-like essence, colored the same shade of gray as her semblance. Deeming whatever it was as harmless to it, the grim wyvern charged forward, its great maw opening wide. However, to the shock of everyone watching, as the wing of the grim came into contact with the wave of murky gray matter, the fleshy red membrane of its wing began to literally fade away. Screeching in agony as whatever Pyrrha had unleashed literally ate away at its left wing, the creature of grim lashed out with its tail. Far beyond exhaustion, and confused as to what she had done, Pyrrha did nothing as the massive black and white limbs slammed into her. "Pyrrha!" RWBY cried out, helplessly watching as the redhead was launched back towards the emerald forest. Before the young team captain could race to catch her friend, the rampaging ancient creature of grim moved to attack her, green flames broiling at the back of its throat. Seeing the physical personification of rot and decay racing towards her, RWBY felt overcome by the wave of emotions she had experienced in a short few hours. Fear, anger, and sadness threatened to drown her as she gazed helplessly at her approaching doom. Unbidden, a familiar face came to the forefront of her mind, an almost forgotten memory coming with it. For a brief moment, RWBY could have sworn she saw a pair of silver eyes much like her own staring back at her, untold amounts of love flowing from them. The smiling face of her mother, Summer Rose, was the last thing RWBY saw in her mind's eye before everything went white. The dull throbbing of a headache woke RWBY from her sleep, causing her to wince as she gingerly lifted herself into a sitting position on her bed. Massaging her forehead in an attempt to soothe her pounding head, the young teen took in the sight of her bedroom with no small amount of confusion. How had she gotten back to Patch? Also, why did it feel like her brain was going to ooze out of her nose at any given moment? Yuck. "RWBY!" Blinking in confusion, the young silver-eyed teen was shocked as the familiar arms of her father wrapped her in a hug. Unsure of why her father seemed so relieved, the young team captain awkwardly patted him on the back. Dad? How did I get home? Taiyang Xiaolong heaved a sigh of immense relief as he backed away, keeping his hands on Ruby's shoulders. It almost seemed like he needed to reassure himself that she was alive or something. Your Uncle Crow found you unconscious. He got you out of Vale and brought you home with everyone else. A smile lit up Ruby's face at the mention of her friends. Everyone else is here too. As if summoned, a stampede of familiar faces barged into her room. The first person she could distinguish from the mass of people was her sister, who had thrown an arm around her and was crying tears of relief. You're okay. My baby sister is okay. Young! Stop! I'm fine. Finally managing to pry her sister off of her, Ruby winced as another lance of pain shot through her skull. But my brain does feel like it's gonna melt or something. Concerned for his youngest, Taiyang knelt at her bedside and looked her over carefully. Seeing no external reason for her pain, memories of a certain lover of his in a similar situation years ago reminded the father of Yang and Ruby that the latter had obviously unlocked the same power her mother had been known for. Deciding to bite his tongue for now, Taiyang instead sighed and shook his head. It only makes sense after what you did to that massive Grim. Yang butted in with her usual grin. Yes, sis, you did one hell of a number on that ugly thing. Blake nodded along with her partner. Whatever you did to that thing made it a little easier for Professor Goodwitch and the others to finish setting up a safe zone in Vale. Wait! Ruby interrupted, waving her hands frantically. Seeing that she had everyone's attention, the red and black-haired teen looked up at those present with confusion written clearly across her face. What did I do? No one said anything for a moment, the younger teens of the group having no answer for her, just as in the dark as Ruby herself. Turning to observe the two older males, everyone was confused to see the heated stare the two were locked in. Crow Branwen, the usually laid-back and carefree uncle, had a look of exasperation and tiredness that really showed just how old the grizzled huntsman was. His faded crimson eyes looked surprisingly dull as he looked at his technical brother-in-law. Taiyang meanwhile seemed angry with his former teammate, the look of a pissed and protective father replacing his normally goofy grin. Yang and Ruby seemed especially thrown off by the silent interaction. Sure, it had always been a sort of unspoken thing that their father and uncle disagreed on a lot, especially when it came to raising them. Despite that, though, it was clear they had an underlying respect for the other, something no doubt born from the years they spent as Team SDRQ. In this moment, though, it was almost like years of an unspoken animosity came to the forefront. Tai, they deserve to know. I will not have my teenage daughters swept into this mess, Crow. Crow shook his head and let out a hollow laugh. These kids just came out of a literal war zone, Tai. It's a bit late to try and protect them from the big bad world out there. Tai all but snarled as he clenched his fists. As much as he wanted to argue, the eldest Xiaolong knew that his alcoholic brother-in-law was right. For all his attempts to keep his daughters away from it, the world that had brought Team SDRQ to its knees and shattered it was back and knocking at their front door. He could try and fight it, but in the long run that would only hinder them. Fine. It was the only thing Taiyang could say as he crossed his arms and leaned against the wall. Shaking his head again, Crow grabbed a nearby chair and slumped into it. Reaching into his shirt, he pulled out his signature flask and took a pull from the liquor in it, knowing full well he was going to need it. As the burn of the whiskey ran its course, the dusty old crow stared straight at his youngest niece. What was the last thing you remember, Ruby? Blinking in confusion, Ruby racked her brain for a moment. I remember running up the side of Beacon Tower. When I got to the top I saw. As the memory came to mind, Ruby couldn't fight the tears that came, her voice catching. I saw Naruto protect Pira. Cinder, she burned a hole straight through his chest. Silent tears and choked sobs echoed around the room as Blake, Nora, Ren, and Yan heard the official account of what had happened. Crow had told them that he had been unable to find the blonde, and with Pira all but catatonic, they had been unsure of his fate, but held out hope that he had somehow survived. Something was off though, as everyone there all knew that the blonde had an unbelievably broken healing factor. Nora and Rin had seen the scar and heard bits of the story, and so they knew that the blonde had survived a similar wound in his past. Surely he would have been able to do the same now, right? They held their questions though, needing to hear the full story from someone who had been there. I don't know why, but he wasn't healing at all. He gave me his staff and told me to watch over Pira. Knowing that Grim was coming back to destroy the tower, he created a clone and told me and Pira to leave. So we left him there. Taeyang could only stare from afar as he watched his daughters break down into tears over this Naruto. While he had initially had his misgivings about a boy being so close to his kids, through his talks with both of them, it was clear that the kid had been an amazing friend to RWBY and someone Young deemed just as fun and badass as herself. Looking at the crying faces of the other teens in the room, it was clear to him that this Naruto kid was someone he would have liked to meet. It was a terrible shame that would never happen. Another bright life taken far too soon by the machinations of those in the shadows. Crow, having met the teen, could not begrudge the teens their right to mourning. Hell, for as brief as their interactions had been, the scythe wielder had honestly grown to like the boy. He saw a lot of himself in the younger male, sharing the same smart mouth and disregard for those in authority. From the stories he had from his nieces, the whiskered teen had even been one hell of a prankster, something Crow could appreciate. Even Ashbin had liked the kid and mentioned a number of times that the teen would be able to help them in dealing with Salem and her group. Seeing as the kid had apparently gone toe-to-toe with Cinder, who has now the Fall Maiden, the blonde was no slouch in combat. However, it seemed like both Ashbin and Naruto had been buried under the now destroyed beacon tower. Trying in vain to stem the flow of tears, RWBY shored up what strength she could and continued her tale. We got as far as we could before that Grim attacked the tower and burned it up. Then, Naruto's clone popped. The meaning of Naruto's clone dispersing was not lost on any of the teens. Any hope they had of their friend somehow managing to survive was dashed when they heard that. Then that thing came after me and Pyrrha. I don't know what she did, but Pyrrha managed to wound it somehow. That only made it angry though, and it attacked her dash. Realization dawned on the young teen as she recalled the last she had seen of the redhead. Pyrrha! Is she okay? Crow looked unsure of how to answer that question. Seeing her uncle clam up almost sent RWBY into a fit of hysterics. However, Ren, fighting through his tears, spoke up. Pyrrha is here and healing, but she's not okay. What do you mean? Is she in a coma or something? Blake stepped up to the plate with a shake of her head. She's awake and can function, but it's almost like she's not here. She won't answer anybody. We have to force her to eat, and all she does is stare at his headband. Although she was happy to hear that Pyrrha was alive, the apparent catatonic state she was in was worrying. However, after all that had happened to her, RWBY couldn't blame her. With her promise to Naruto in mind, RWBY decided to check on the redhead ASAP. After it attacked Pyrrha, that thing came for me. I remember seeing Mom. Then everything sort of went white. Crow and Taeyang shared a look at the mention of Summer Rose, someone the two held in high regard. Taking a moment to take another swig from his flask, Crow asked, The night you met Ashbin, what was the first thing he said to you? Thrown off guard by the seemingly unrelated question, RWBY wiped away some tears before answering. I don't remember. I think it was something about my dash, Silver Eyes. Taking note of the looks of confusion he was getting from everyone in the room, Crow continued. That's an extremely rare trait, a trait your mom had as well. Still completely lost, RWBY couldn't but to shrug. From both stories and pictures, it was clear as day that she was an almost miniature version of her mother. Why was that such a big deal now though? So? Crow sighed as leaned back into his chair. You're special, RWBY, and not in the daddy loves his precious little girl way either. Taeyang groused none too silently at the jab at him. Crow, however, ignored him and continued. Your mom was an amazing woman. Both me and your father could go on about how amazingly kind she was, how forgiving she could be, and how much she loved both you and Yang. But Summer was also an exceptionally powerful warrior. She could do things that no one else could, fight at a level that was almost unbelievable. Here, Crow leaned forward and stared into his niece's eyes. Do you know why? RWBY blinked. Because she trained really hard? Crow laughed, a genuine one at that. As true as that is, she also had something else going for her. You see, Remnant's full of legends and fairy tales, some of them true, some of them not so much. But there's one else told me about, one older than any of the kingdoms. Back before Huntsman, before even Dust maybe, it was said those born with silver eyes were destined to lead the life of a warrior. They were the best of the best. Even the creatures of Grimm, said to be darkness incarnate, were afraid of those silver-eyed warriors. It was rumored that with a single look, one of these warriors could cut down any Grimm. Scratching her head in disbelief, RWBY could only ask, So you think that me and my mom are related to those warriors? Crow grinned. Well, there's currently a giant Grimm frozen at the edge of the Emerald Forest, heavily wounded as well. And here you are, safe in bed with only a little headache. Despite the oddness of being told that she was apparently a descendant of some ancient race of badass warriors, RWBY all too easily accepted that as fact. It did make sense in the context of what had happened, but Naruto himself had been from a time of even more powerful warriors. He had also had a teammate who came from a clan whose eyes gave them the ability to do some pretty outlandish things. So, to RWBY and everyone else present, this wasn't all that far removed from the realm of possibility. Still, there was something else that wasn't adding up. Blake was the one to speak up about it. Wait, how would you know what Professor Ashbin told RWBY? Crow chuckled at being discovered by the raven-haired bookworm. Good catch there, kitten. Blake leveled a bland glare at her teammate's uncle. You know those missions I'm always going on, the ones I can never talk to you about? It's been for Oz. Rising from his seat, the grizzled huntsman moved to stare out the window. But now he's missing. Something has been set in motion, and I'm gonna have to be the one to pick up the pieces. While each of the teens could tell the older male wasn't telling them everything, they couldn't call him out on it either, seeing as how they were keeping some secrets to themselves as well. Knowing that the threat of Naruto's ancestral grandmother was still prevalent as well as the threat of Cinder, and whoever her boss was, RWBY shared a look with her teammates and friends. Unspoken, they all came to the same agreement. Ren stepped forward. We want to help. Crow looked at the resolution clearly painted on each of the teens' faces and was only mildly surprised. Quirking a brow, the caped huntsman asked, You really want to help? Heal up, take some time to grieve, and take even more time to train. After all, our enemy's trail leads all the way to Haven, and that's one hell of a trip for a bunch of teenagers. Sharing a pointed look with Taeyang, Crow made for the door. Tossing out a two-finger salute, the red-eyed huntsman left. See ya around, kiddies. Shaking his head at the antics of his once-upon-a-time teammate, Taeyang gave his daughters a hug before making to leave as well. I'll give you kids some time to yourselves. For a long moment, none of the teens said a word, trying their hardest to come to grips with all that had been said within the last few minutes. Wiping the tears from her eyes, RWBY allowed a small smile to cross her face as she took in the faces of her friends. Sure, they had each lost a lot, far too much to possibly ever quantify, but they still had each other. It would be hard to move forward, possibly near impossible, but they owed it to Naruto and Kurama. However, something finally struck RWBY as out of place. Squinting her eyes as she surveyed her room, it hit the young teen like a train. Guys? Where's Weiss? Blake and Yang shared a look, the blonde playing with her hair as she tried to find the words to explain the Schnee heiress' absence. Thankfully, Blake elected to step up and explain the situation. Weiss was taken back to Atlas by her father. What? Why? Is she okay? RWBY had lost too many people already. There was no way she could also stand to lose her partner or hear that she had somehow been gravely injured. Seeing her sister about to possibly have a panic attack, Yang moved to sit at her side, bringing her into a much-needed one-armed side hug. She's perfectly okay, Blake rushed to explain, hoping to ease her captain's mind. Seeing the younger teen relax, the raven-haired faunus continued. It looks like someone was purposefully filming what happened that night. The last thing anybody saw on that recording before the tower went down was Atlas attacking Vale alongside the White Fang and the Grim. People are terrified that this could be the start of another war. Because of that, Weiss' father came to take her back to Atlas where he thinks she'll be safe. RWBY coiled her fists around her comforter, fighting back tears of frustration. For the first time, Nora spoke up, in an uncharacteristically subdued tone. This is all one big mess. No one could find it in them to refute her claim. Pira? The only sound made following that was the wooden floorboards creaking as RWBY cautiously stepped into one of her home's spare rooms. The silver-eyed side-wielder bit her lip as she observed the redhead. Stepping further in, RWBY's heart broke as she got a good look at the almost lifeless young woman. Waves of a once vibrant crimson were now a dull and lackluster red. Emerald green eyes that had shined with kindness and caring stared blankly at the heavily damaged and worn headband Naruto had worn near constantly in some fashion. Even Pira's near flawless and soft alabaster skin now looked far too pale and clammy. Reaching a hand out, RWBY sighed as the redhead remained unresponsive. Pira. I don't know if you can hear me, or if you even want to hear me, but I just want you to know that I'm sorry. I wish I had gotten there sooner. Maybe if I had been a little faster, he'd still be here, helping us get ready to fight whoever was responsible for all of this. I miss him. Tears splashed against the wooden floor despite Ruby's best efforts to hold them in. He was my first real friend at Beacon. I was so nervous and scared of how everyone was going to treat me, because I was so much younger than them. Even my own sister left me alone, but he came to help me, just because. Even when I acted like a total dork with him, he only laughed and I asked if I felt better. He helped me deal with all the stress I had about being a team captain. He never made fun of me for being so interested in weapons. He was, just, always there for me whenever I needed him. It was almost like I had found the older brother I never knew about. Ruby rubbed her eyes furiously, trying and failing to stem the flow of tears. Through the blur of her watery vision, the young woman choked back a sob as she realized that Pyrrha had still not moved a single muscle. Swallowing the lump in her throat, Ruby steeled herself as she quickly left the room only to come back a certain staff. I know you're trying to deal with all of this in your own way, we all are. But I just want you to know that we're all worried about you and ready to help you as best as we can when you're ready. Gently placing the chakra-conductive weapon against the wall, Ruby spared her friend one last glance. I know he gave this to me so you could have it. He'd want you to use it. The gentle click of the door closing echoed around the deafeningly silent room. Following that, no other sound was made. Then, the sound of the bed creaking was heard as a pair of somber green eyes stared longingly at the ebony staff that had belonged to Naruto Uzumaki. You going to be okay? Blake spared her partner a sidelong glance as the blonde took a seat next to her. The amber-eyed fauness took a moment to collect her thoughts. In the meantime her gaze returned to stretch of pure white snow that occupied the Xiaolong/Rose home's backyard. No. It hurts. I think the only reason I've stopped crying is because I've run out of tears. Yang found herself with no words. There was nothing she could say. After all, she was in much the same boat as everyone else. They all felt lost. It was almost like the very sun itself had been taken from their world. Despite putting up a brave face, she couldn't deny the pain she felt in her heart at having lost someone she considered such a dear friend. With that in mind, the usually brash blonde simply said nothing, sitting in silence with her partner. I'm catching the next boat home to Menagerie. Why? It was the only thing Yang could think to ask. When I left home all those years ago, I wasn't exactly on the best of terms with my parents. It's been so long since I've seen or even talked to them. With all that's happened, I think it's time to go back and apologize to them. While it wasn't outright said, Yang got the message loud and clear. After that night, she found herself trying to spend as much time with her own family as well. She couldn't say Blake was wrong for wanting to do the same. You better keep in touch. If I don't hear a word from you, I'm riding out to Menagerie and giving you an earful, ya hear? Blake rolled her eyes, before giving her partner a tight hug. The same goes for you and Ruby. A grunt of pain slipped past Ren's lips as his fist plowed into the trunk of a tree. Despite the droplets of blood leaking from his knuckles and the sweat occasionally blurring his vision, the long-haired teen continued with his training, wanting to push his body past its limits. Not too far from him, Nora was likewise pushing her body to the breaking point, her fists leaving indents on the poor boulder she had chosen as her practice dummy. The two hadn't spoken much since the fall of Beacon. Knowing how tight-knit Team NPR had been, everyone knew that the death of their captain and Pyrrha being rendered all but comatose had hit the two the hardest, so they had been mostly left to their own devices. While the others had only seen the two spill a few tears, it had been in private that the two longtime friends had mourned their loss. The pair had, for all intents and purposes, drawn into themselves. For as close as they had been before, it was almost like they were now terrified to leave the other's side. Unknown to the others residing in the Xiaolong/Rose household, this wasn't the first time the pair had done this. However, training themselves this rigorously, Ren and Nora were intent on making damn sure that it would be the last time. You surprised me yet again, Cinder. Not only did you secure us the powers of the Fall Maiden, but you have also put down two of our biggest threats. Well done. I aim to please. I'll be sending some Grim to secure the relic and see if there is any way we can collect any of Kurama's chakra that is no doubt lingering in the area. Hopefully we can do so before the beast reforms. We'll also need to find the boy's body. Dr. Merlot seems to be interested in using his blood in some of his experiments. What of the girl with silver eyes? You need not concern yourself with her, she will be taken care of. For now, it would be wise of you to spend your time mastering the powers you've acquired. Of course. Beacon Academy had been a shining symbol of hope for many, Its beautifully designed towers and its position overlooking the city of Vale acted as a much-needed sign to the people that there still remained a light in the dark. That light had been snuffed out. The once masterfully designed and built towers that gave Beacon its name now lay in ruin. Once home to hundreds of huntsmen in training, the prestigious academy had been overrun by an innumerable amount of Grimm, all drawn to the lingering miasma of negativity that hung in the air. At least it seemed so to the untrained eye. What would surprise many was the fact that the Grimm seemed to be searching for something, turning over mountains of rubble to do so. One particular alpha, surrounded by other large Grimm like it, was using its hooked claws and strength to dig through the remains of what had been the CCT relay and Beacon's namesake. The creature, having lived a countless number of decades at this point, was confused when it encountered what looked to be the arm of a deceased human. Not one to turn down a free meal, the Grimm began to excavate the area around the corpse. It began to salivate at the mouth as it uncovered what looked to be an almost fresh body, somehow well preserved with only a handful of serious wounds. Reaching down, the alpha used its massive paws to lift the corpse up. Think it'll work? Not at all. To the surprise of the Grimm, the corpse moved, placing its hand on the creature's snout. A howl of pain left the alpha as it could feel its life literally being drained from it. Naruto collapsed to the floor in a heap as the Grimm that had been holding him up faded from existence. Feeling the twisted form of nature chakra course through his body, Naruto could feel himself almost overcome by the darkness that every creature of Grimm seemed to be born with. However, Uzumaki Naruto was not exactly known for being weak of will. Fighting through the darkness, the Jinchuriki put the nature chakra he had absorbed to work, using it to heal some of his more egregious wounds that remained. Actually being able to move, the blonde forced himself to his feet. Gasping for air, the blonde knew he had to get to a safe place. Although he had managed to heal most of his wounds, he still needed more time and rest to get back into tip-top form. Looking at all the Grimm surrounding him, this probably wasn't the most ideal spot for that. Let me take over. You work on undoing the last of that damned seal and I'll use what chakra we have to get us out of here. Got it. As Kurama took over control of his partner's body, Naruto's normally bright sapphire blue eyes bled into a much more sinister shade of crimson. Funneling as much of his chakra as he could through his Jinchuriki, Kurama pushed Naruto's body to the brink, forcing it to move as fast as it could without breaking any bones. Coming to edge of the cliff that separated Beacon from the rest of Vale, Kurama took a chance and leapt forward. Halfway through his freefall, the Biju managed to summon up enough of his chakra to create a tailless shroud. Confident the chakra shroud would absorb most of the damage, Kurama pushed Naruto's body into a nosedive. All that could be seen from a distance was what looked like a reddish-orange missile plowing into the water at almost terminal velocity. Using chakra, Kurama pushed Naruto's body to the surface. Crap, it looks like that was all your body could take, Gaki. Taking control of his body once more, Naruto growled out in pain as he could feel a multitude of wounds reopening. Could have warned me you were going to try and commit suicide, you ass. Kurama huffed. You should be grateful I got us out of there, you ungrateful brat. Lot of good that did us. I can't even move my body and I'm pretty damn sure I'm about pass out from pain and exhaustion, and would you look at that, we're floating on our back in the middle of a freaking lake. The irrevocably bound pair went back and forth for a few minutes, continuing to insult the other with scathing words and childish retorts. Seeing as how he could barely even move a finger at this point, Naruto accepted the fact that his course was now entirely up to wherever the gentle waves of the lake pulled him. Hopefully Lady Luck would do him another solid and send him floating back to his friends. Thankfully, Naruto felt himself finally drift into something solid. Well, would you look at that, Neil? Looks like we bagged us a new fish species. Think it'll go good with some tartar sauce? Naruto used the last bit of his strength to turn his head. He was greeted by a familiar pair of heterochromatic eyes and a shock of flaming orange hair that seemed to just piss him off. Well, shit, was the blonde's last thought before the sweet darkness of unconsciousness took him.